Good morning, everyone. This is Kathy Howe from the State Historic Preservation. Just wanted to welcome everyone today. We are going to get started. We do have a quorum. First off, I want to say that unfortunately, our board chairman, Doug Pirelli, is unable to make today's meeting, but Carol Clark, one of our other board members, has graciously stepped in and will be serving as today's chair for the board meeting. So with that, welcome everyone, and we will get started with the meeting. We will call it to order.
Yes, thank you, Kathy. It's Carol. I see that it is 10:03 by my watch, so let's call the meeting to order. And I will call each member's name, and then we'll mark them as present or absent. Doug Pirelli, as you noted, is absent. Wint Aldrich. Carol Clark, I'm here. Kristen Herron.
I'm present.
Thank you, Kristen. Erica Krieger.
Present.
Thank you, Erica. Jennifer Lemack.
I'm here.
Thanks, Jennifer. Wayne Goodman.
I'm here.
Thank you, Wayne. Gretchen Soren.
I'm here.
Thanks, Gretchen. Brian Irwin.
Present.
Thanks, Brian. Chuck Vandry.
Present.
And Jay DiLorenzo. I understand that Jay is not going to be with us, so that means I'll try Wint Aldrich again. Wint. So we have 8 members present. Is that correct, Kathy?
Yes, I believe that is correct.
We have a quorum.
We do have a quorum, and Wint should be joining us shortly. You did say he will be attending. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me remind everyone, please, about the voting method for online meetings. It's as follows. Once we have a motion and a second, there will be a call for any opposed or abstaining votes. If there are none, the motion is carried by unanimous consent. So with that, let's get started with the meeting, and I'll turn to the Deputy Commissioner, Daniel McKay, for his Deputy Commissioner's report. Daniel?
Actually,
Good morning.
Hi, Daniel. Daniel, hi, this is Kathy. Before we do that, what I'd like to do, if we could, is go around and have the board members, before we go to your report, sorry to interrupt, if we could have each of the board members say a little bit about themselves, and then we'll roll right into your report. Thank you. So let's start with Carol.
Sure. I'm sorry, I forgot about that.
No problem.
Yes. I'm Carol Clark. I'm an adjunct professor of historic preservation at Columbia University. I teach preservation law at Pratt Institute and preservation practice and policy at New York University.
Thank you. Erica.
Yes, good morning. My name is Erica Krieger. I'm a registered architect, and I'm here representing the Department of State and Secretary of State Rodriguez.
Thank you. Kristen.
Good morning. I'm Kristen Herron. I'm a program director for architecture and design in museums at the New York State Council on the Arts, and I am here representing our chair, Catherine Nichols.
Super. Let's move on to Jennifer Lemack.
Good morning. I'm Jennifer Lemack. I'm the Chief Curator of History at the New York State Museum, and I am on the board representing the Commissioner of Education.
And out to Western New York, Wayne.
Yeah, I'm Wayne Goodman. I'm a director of the Landmark Society of Western New York in Rochester.
And down to Cooperstown, Gretchen.
Gretchen Soren. I am a historian and professor of museum studies and art history at the Cooperstown Graduate Program, which is part of the State University of New York at Oneonta.
And out to Long Island to Brian, one of our new board members.
Hi, everybody. Brian Irwin. I am chair of the State Council of Parks, as well as chair of the Long Island State Commission.
Thank you. And back to Albany with Chuck.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Chuck Vandry. I'm an archaeologist with the Department of Environmental Conservation, where I serve as the Historic Preservation Officer. And I hold the proxy for Commissioner Sagos.
Okay, thank you. And Wint has not joined us yet, so with that, let's go ahead and turn it over to Daniel McKay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Carol, let me extend my thanks for stepping into the chair role today. Much appreciated. It has been a very busy quarter for the Division for Historic Preservation. Workload, it's been quite interesting how workload here has just maintained a remarkably consistent level. In fact, we've even seen growth and additional work in several program areas. So we remain busy. So I want to note at first and have you offer your congratulations to Kathy Howe, because we have completed a full transition of the senior staff team here at the Division for Historic Preservation, and we have named Kathy Howe as Director of Community Preservation Services Bureau and the Tax Credit Unit, and she fills the position created by Julian Adams' retirement. And we're very pleased that Kathy stepped into that position, and congratulations to her. She's off to a busy and impactful start, and she is the final member of a complete renewal of the senior staff team here at the Division for Historic Preservation. That team, obviously led by Dan McEnany as Division Director, but also includes Nancy Herder as Director of the Technical Preservation Bureau and Greg Smith as Director of Historic Sites and Parks Services Bureau. So it's the division is in very good hands right now, and I just want to give credit to this team, this senior team in particular. They work well together. They are forward-thinking. They are eager to expand the capabilities and extend the accomplishments of this agency in the preservation context. I will note, however, that we have not yet backfilled the vacated unit manager positions from which they were promoted. And so they are really, there is quite a workload on these 4 staff at this point in time. It is our intention to address the backfills at the unit management level this summer. This is a priority for us. It's a priority for this team and their workload, but it's also a priority so that we can advance the next generation of unit leadership here at the division. And we are eager to engage with the staff that are looking to step into that next level of responsibility. 2 long unfilled positions in our conservation labs will soon be fulfilled. Lauren Ross has been hired as our framing and gilding conservator. She will come to the Bureau of Historic Sites from a long-standing position at the Baltimore Museum of Art, and is relocating, of course, for this position. Also relocating is Paige Schmidt, our new furniture conservator. She comes to us from the Mariners Museum in Newport News. They will each start in June, and so we'll be here within the next few weeks. We had permission to hire these positions in February 2020. That permission was rescinded when COVID struck, and we are very grateful that the commissioner and executive staff restored these positions for hire this past fall, and have made a new commitment to the capabilities, the rather extraordinary and unique capabilities of our conservation team in the East Wing there. Some updates, some policy and fiscal updates. The enacted state budget agreement increased the agency fill level. So the agency has had an increase in the number of staff it is allowed to hire, and has over the winter months has met that fill level. There was an increase to the agency's operational budget in the enacted budget agreement, and an increase in the agency's capital budget. The legislature actually added $50 million to the chamber's proposal, and the agency now has $250 million in capital budget allocation to undertake capital projects across the site, the parks and historic site system in state fiscal year 2022-2023. This is an extraordinary development for the agency. We will spend that money quickly and effectively, and it's really nice to see the agency's ability to meet long unaddressed capital improvement needs across the system. The Environmental Protection Fund was passed with a funding allocation of $400 million. This is $100 million over the statutory requirement, or the statutory mandate, I guess. This will increase the amount of funding available for agency grant programs, open space acquisition, and so we expect to see continued progress in acquiring buffer lands and additional properties for the state park system, as well as additional funds to regrant to local and regional partners. The Bond Act proposal was also authorized. This $4.2 billion proposal for environmental funding will be on the November ballot, and there are a number of programs in that proposal that will also benefit the agency. I want to note 2 master planning efforts that are newly underway in the historic site system. The agency is launching a master planning effort at both John Brown Farm State Historic Site outside of Lake Placid and at Grant's Cottage in Wilton. Additionally, it has finally been announced publicly that a new visitor orientation center will be built at Olana State Historic Site. That facility is undergoing final permitting and planning, and site construction will begin late fall. The Olana Partnership has undertaken all fundraising efforts to date for that project, and that will be a significant new amenity carefully sited on that property. The board has heard past references to the transformative investment underway at Phillip's Manor Hall State Historic Site in Yonkers. The restoration of and improvements to the Manor Hall, including a new elevator tower, are complete, have been beautifully executed by all reports, and finishing touches are now being put on the landscaping and the caretaker house upgrades. Exhibit installation will begin this summer with a planned opening in September 2022, and we will look forward to inviting this board to that ribbon cutting. 2 more items. The Historic Business Preservation Registry program that Christina briefed you on at the December meeting was publicly launched in late March to highlight New York State businesses that have been in operation for at least 50 years and have contributed to their community's history. That program debuted with 100 listings from across the state and the launch of a new agency webpage chronicling the program and the registered businesses. We will make sure you see a link to that in the minutes to this meeting. And the launch of that program has generated the next wave of interest and nominations, and we'll be updating the web page, the program page, on a rolling basis. Finally, before handing off the introduction of the Revamped Historic Barn Tax Credit Program by Olivia Brzee, I want to acknowledge Senate sponsor Michelle Hinchy and Assembly sponsor Dee Dee Barrett for this legislation. They and their respective staff consulted extensively with our office regarding reviving and revising this program, and provided staff such as Olivia and Bill Prattinger ample attention to inform the next iteration of this most needed incentive. So we're very pleased with the input we had with the legislative staff and the members. We have a great new barn tax credit as a result, and we certainly are pleased that the legislation earned the support of Governor Hochul. And I just want to give Olivia an extra nod. She, in the 4.5 years between the unintentional loss of the former barn credit program and the revival in this current format, Olivia maintained a very detailed file of inquiries of barn owners across the state who were very were upset to have lost the incentive and eager for its return. And so when this program relaunched this spring, I think Olivia's numbers were there were over 150 inquiries in a contact file that we could immediately notify that the incentive was newly available and newly enhanced. So Olivia, I pass it to you.
Thanks so much, Daniel. And good morning, members of the board. I'm Olivia Brzee. I work in the Technical Services Unit, and I will just touch on some of the background of the barn tax credit that Daniel's already mentioned. Next slide, please. So as he alluded to, we had a barn tax credit program starting in 1997. We basically lost that program when the new federal tax code took effect in 2018. This is kind of an interesting bit of arcana, but apparently the original barn tax credit legislation at the state level had some language had been taken directly from the federal tax code, specifically the 10% tax credit for non-historic buildings. And that tax credit was repealed in 2018, meaning the language was stripped from our state legislation. So we were left with a program, a barn tax credit program that was available only to barns listed in the National Register of Historic Places, which, as you can imagine, is a very low percentage of barns statewide. So as Daniel also mentioned, we had the great support and leadership of Dee Dee Barrett and Michelle Hinchy, and we did look forward to the reintroduction of the barn tax credit program in at least same if not better form as we had. Next slide, please. So the legislation was signed in December 2021 by Governor Hochul, and it's the same as it was before, except better. It's still a 25% tax credit against New York State income tax owed. It's a little bit more flexible than the previous program. As I note on this slide, it aligns with one of the goals in our statewide preservation plan of providing financial incentives for rural and agricultural buildings. The bottom of this slide is just an excerpt from the actual legislation. Next slide, please. So I'll just dive into the major program requirements. You must be a New York State taxpayer in order to qualify for the barn tax credit currently. The barn must have been constructed prior to 1946. If it is later than that date, but a contributing property to or a contributing building to a listed property, it will also qualify for the credit. The barn must basically be a barn. So the definition of barn in our new program is a little bit more broad than it was under the previous program and definition. So it must have been used as an agricultural facility or for related agricultural purposes. So we basically include agricultural outbuildings and carriage barns in the new program. In order to qualify for the program, your barn rehabilitation project must be at least $5,000 or more. The work that you do must not drastically change the historic appearance of the barn. The program is not for converting barns into residences, but beyond that, there are no specific prohibitions on type of use. So if your barn is just sitting there being a barn and you might be storing things in it or you might be holding events in it periodically, that will qualify, as long as the physical work that you do to the barn doesn't materially alter the historic appearance. The other really great thing about the program is there is a 5-year look-back window, allowing people who file for the credit to claim work that was done within a 5-year period immediately prior to filing. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to give you a quick look at the application form that we have, and it might look familiar. It's based very, very closely on the homeowner tax credit application form. So there's the part 1 and 2, and then the part 3. And if you're a barn owner who has already completed a project on your barn, all you need to do is submit. You still need to submit the part 1 and 2 along with your part 3, but you basically only need to tell us what you did, and you in the part 3 form. So it's we hope it's a pretty easy and simple application. Okay, next slide, please. This is just an image of the part 3 form, and on the lower left, there's a excerpt of the program, or the project worksheet that we use, which is the same as the homeowner, where the form asks you to describe the existing condition and the proposed work. So for an example, deteriorated standing seam metal roof will be replaced in kind, estimated cost $40,000. Boom, done, you got the credit. Okay, next slide, please. So on our website, we have an instruction sheet that goes along with the application form. And at the last part of the instruction sheet are the lists of qualifying rehabilitation expenditures and non-qualifying rehabilitation expenditures. So we hope that that will be helpful to applicants in understanding what type of work will qualify. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thanks. Okay, so this is just an image of the FAQ sheet that we have put together for the program, which is also available on our website. Hoping that people can refer to this and help answer some of their questions as they fill out their, or as they consider applying for the barn tax credit program. I think that's my last slide. So basically, we posted the application form and FAQ sheet and instruction sheet on our website in early May, so it's been about a month, and we've gotten 5 complete applications so far, which doesn't sound like a lot, but as Daniel did say, we've had at least 150 people expressing interest in applying for the program since the fall when word started getting out about the new barn tax credit. And so we have contacted almost all of those 150 people either via email or paper mailing or phone call. I think there's just a few people left that I need to call to let them know that the application form is available. So program is up and running. We've done 2 workshops, one in person at Glimmerglass State Park in collaboration with Otsego 2000 to introduce people to the new barn tax credit. We had a good Q&A session at that event. There were about 25 people in attendance. Just yesterday, the Preservation League of New York State hosted a webinar on the barn tax credit, and I gave the details of the program, and there were about 60 people in attendance on that webinar yesterday. So we're excited to have this new program, and it's up and running, and there you have it. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. That was a very robust report, and thank you also, Daniel, for your Deputy Commissioner's report. With that,
can I add one thing?
Sure.
Yeah, we're so pleased to have this incentive back in play here in New York. There are other states around us that have these type, have barn credits, and we're happy to have it reestablished here. One thing to note in the quest for continued improvement and effectiveness, we have already heard from advocates that ideally we would, much like the homeowner tax credit, also make this credit refundable for people with lower annual incomes. And so I expect that we will probably take a swing at that this fall with these bill sponsors of the original legislation and seek an amendment in the 2023 legislative session. So we always want to, just to have it on the books is great, but to make it truly effective, that might be a very useful amendment.
Thanks, Daniel, for that important point. With that, let's turn to Kathy Howe for the National Register nomination reviews.
Thank you, Carol. We are hearing from Wint, and he was having some technical difficulties. We've got someone troubleshooting with him, so he is trying to get into WebEx, so we'll let you know if he can get through. Always fun to deal with the technical challenges of this virtual environment. So welcome everyone again. This is a map showing today's distribution of National Register nominations. We actually have, actually 25, I believe, not 24. But you can see the distribution around New York State. Again, I want to thank all of the property owners, the sponsors, their consultants, everyone that have worked so hard to prepare today's drafts, working with our very highly skilled staff at pulling these draft nominations together for your look today. Also want to thank Virginia for putting the PowerPoint presentation together, and also for Kath LaFranc, who did the final sort of eagle eye edits to these nominations today. Now I will ask staff to, after they've given their presentation for each nomination, to, if you have guests, we know we have several guests, owners, sponsors, et cetera, today, please let's, introduce the guests, and certainly guests are welcome to speak after each presentation is given. Also, I do want to say today we're doing something a little bit different. We decided, and perhaps you've noticed, that we're now grouping nominations by thematic, by themes, by historic themes, or architectural typology. So that's a little bit different in how we're moving forward today with this. So with that, I am going to move forward with our first presenter, Virginia Bartos.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Good morning.
Yes.
Good morning.
Okay, good. Wasn't sure. I'm not using my headset, so that's why I'm asking if you can hear me. Our first presentation is the Fancher World War II Memorial in Orleans County. Fancher is a hamlet in the town of Murray, located about halfway between Albion and Holly. The sponsor of this nomination is the town, which maintains the monument and the site, and the author of the nomination is Aaron Anhire, a local preservation consultant. Just to quickly recap from the nomination draft you received, the memorial was dedicated in 1949 and is located at a prominent bend where Fancher Road meets State Road 31. I believe the draft you received stated that one of the summary paragraphs that it was dedicated in 1945, that's been corrected. The monument commemorates 10 men from the area who died in service during World War II. Next slide, please. The monument is being nominated under Criterion C for its design and for being constructed with locally quarried Medina sandstone. Pasquale DeLaura is the monument's designer, and his original plan is on the right side of the slide. Like many of those active in the stone quarrying industry, DeLaura was an Italian immigrant who came to Orleans County, where his father worked in the quarries. After graduating from high school, DeLaura earned a business degree. He first worked as an accountant, then later helped to reorganize the stone cutting industry in Orleans County, eventually opening his own stone company in 1946. Next slide, please. Here we see details of the monument showing the plaque and one of the 4 clock faces. The stand seen in the lower left has a replica of the plaque that was added to the site in 2021 when the monument was repaired in kind with new mortar and the clocks were upgraded. The sandstone steps were added at the same time. The monument has served as a gathering place for community commemorations, and it stands not only for the men it memorializes, but as a source of pride for Fancher and especially for the local Italian-American community. As stated in the nomination, 5 of the men memorialized were of Italian-American heritage. Questions or comments?
If there are no questions, do we have a motion?
Hi, this is Wayne. I'll move that.
Wayne, thank you. And a second?
This is Erica.
Oh, go ahead, Erica. That's okay.
It's Erica Krieger. I'll second.
Erica Krieger seconds. Thank you. Are there any opposed or abstaining votes? If there are none, the motion is carried by unanimous consent. Next, we have Jennifer Walkowski.
I wanted to mention we're moving, again, with these section breaks into the theme of Black social history with this grouping. Take it away, Jen.
Great. So the next 3 presentations are the culmination of our office's recent work funded with an African American Civil Rights Grant from the National Park Service. Especially now in light of the recent tragedy in Buffalo's East Side, we're pleased that our work helps bring attention to the city's African American history. Excuse me. Buffalo Public School 32 is significant under Criterion A in the area of social history and African American civil rights for its affiliation with the educational program of BUILD, an organization that used local strategies to dismantle racial discrimination in many aspects of urban life in Buffalo. Next slide, please. BUILD, which stands for Build, Unity, Independence, Liberty, and Dignity, was established in 1966 at a time when nationwide efforts to end racial inequality coincided with an influx of African Americans into Buffalo. As residents continued to experience overwhelming disparity in all sectors of life, a group of the city's Black community organizers formed BUILD, uniting numerous local groups from Buffalo's East Side and drawing on the ideology of Black power to develop a more assertive response to a wide variety of issues. As such, BUILD demanded, rather than simply requested, accommodation in such areas as job discrimination, police reform, and housing inequality. Among BUILD's most important and successful programs was its effort to assist Buffalo's disenfranchised public school students by setting up its own school, BUILD Academy, in 1969 with a curriculum, learning methods, and policy boards specifically focused on the needs of Black students. This focus on education was in direct response to the lack of integration in Buffalo City schools. In 1967, Buffalo had been identified as the fourth most segregated school system in the North by the U.S. Civil Rights Commission, and the district ultimately would not be fully integrated until 1981. From its establishment, the BUILD Academy curriculum emphasized a Black-centric student experience, focusing on a curriculum that prioritized Black cultures, experiences, and histories, established successful mechanisms for regular parent participation, and encouraged racial uplift through education. BUILD also pioneered many important educational features that were later incorporated into Buffalo's magnet schools. BUILD Academy is exceptionally significant in combating the effects of segregation and substandard education for a generation of Buffalo's Black students. Between 1969 and 1977, BUILD Academy was located in this building on Clinton Street. After that, due to the success and enrollment at the school, it was officially designated a magnet school and relocated to a new location on Fougeron Street. BUILD Academy was perhaps the most successful initiative established by the BUILD organization, creating a lasting impact on the history. Creating a lasting impact on the history of civil rights, racial uplift, and the educational practices in Buffalo during the late 20th century. BUILD Academy opened in fall 1969 at 342 Clinton Street in Buffalo's Bennett Park neighborhood just east of downtown. The school opened to 396 students in pre-kindergarten through fourth grade. The school building's previous classrooms, corridors, and gathering spaces were easily converted from PS32 to BUILD's purposes. There was a waiting list for enrollment by the second year, and the school expanded to 500 students and added the sixth grade. Next slide. Next slide, please. Built in 1913, the building also meets criterion C for architecture as a good example of an early 20th century school designed in the Tudor Revival style. Buffalo Public School number 32 is a single building that reflects two distinct building phases. The east portion reflects the original construction in 1913 with a three-story steel-framed brick school with an H-shaped plan, typical of many standardized schools in Buffalo built during the 1910s and 20s. The west portion, which is non-historic, was constructed in 2009 and consists of a three-story brick and metal-clad modern addition extending west and north in an L-shaped plan. Next slide, please. Known today as Bennett Park Montessori, the building retains a high degree of architectural integrity to convey its historic function as an early 20th century Tudor Revival style school. The period of significance recognizes the building's construction in 1913 and the period in which it served as the BUILD Academy from 1969 to 1977. I just want to note that we have received a very enthusiastic email of support from the Buffalo School District, noting that they, quote, appreciate these honorable nominations and look forward to celebrating this worthy achievement. So this is Buffalo Public School number 32. Are there any questions on this?
If there are no questions, do we have a motion?
This is Kristen. I'll move it.
Thank you, Kristen. And is there a second?
This is Gretchen. I'll second it.
Gretchen, thank you. If there are none, then the motion is carried by unanimous consent. Jennifer, I think we have another public school in Buffalo.
We do. There we go. Next, we have Buffalo Public School number 92, the second home of the BUILD Academy, located on Fougeron Street in Buffalo. The building was initially designed and constructed as the Genesee Humboldt Junior High School in 1961. In 1977, BUILD Academy moved into the building from its original location at Clinton Street. BUILD Academy continues to operate today, even after the demise of the BUILD organization in 1983. Build Academy was perhaps the most successful initiative established by the Build organization, creating a lasting impact on the history of civil rights, racial uplift, and educational practices in Buffalo during the late 20th century. Next slide, please. In 1977, Build Academy was officially designated as a magnet school and was accordingly moved to 340 Fougeron Street in order to accommodate a new integrated student population. At that time, the school added the 7th and 8th grade. As a magnet school, this more formal connection with the system led to changes in the administration, student population, curriculum, and learning environment. Despite the changes in the demise of the Build organization in 1983, the school continues to function according to some of its original principles to this day. Next slide. Build Academy's move into this building on Fougeron Street in late 1977 was catalyzed by its new designation as a magnet school. The new location provided newer, larger facilities for the Build Academy, given by the Buffalo Public School Systems, with the implication that it would accommodate a larger population that accommodated white students as well. Magnet schools, now common in the Buffalo Public School System, were established to address school desegregation in Buffalo in the 1970s and 80s. As part of a multi-phase court-mandated school desegregation plan, 10 magnet schools were announced between 1976 and 1977. Each of these new magnet schools was located in a segregated Black neighborhood. Next slide. There are at least 4 main components at the core of a Build Academy education as it existed at Fougeron Street. A curriculum that includes Black history and racial uplift, a responsive environmental model, an emphasis on parental involvement, and the Academy Policy Board. Underlying all of these is the Black power and education that embraces a Black-centric education for an exclusively Black student population. Rather than trying to fit Black students into a white system, Build Academy sought to create a new educational environment based on Black experiences instead. To achieve this, Build actively created new learning environments, curriculum content, community-centric programs, and administrative paths. Again, we have the full support of Buffalo City School District for this nomination. So this is Buffalo Public School number 92. Are there any questions with this?
If there are no questions, may we have, please?
This is Kristen. I'll move this one as well.
Thanks,
And I'll
Kristen.
second it. Gretchen Soren.
Oh, thanks, Gretchen. Okay, and the motion is carried by unanimous consent. Thank you, everyone. And now we're turning to James Finelli.
We have one more. Slide.
I just wanted to mention before we move on to James that yeah, there we go. Sorry, we're going to do the new Skateland Arena, which is more of an informational presentation. I had mentioned this at the previous meeting, and this is all sort of related and funded to both the Build schools, which were nominated, and this in which the consultants prepared an inventory form on this building. It is related a bit to the history of Build. And these nominations in this particular inventory form, these were funded by a National Park Service civil rights grant that we received a few years ago. So just wanted to let everyone know of that initiative, and these are some of the outcomes from that grant. And we will be applying for more grants from the Park Service for underrepresented communities and probably civil rights related themes. So with that, I'll turn this courtesy presentation over to Jen Wachowski. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Kathy. So this next presentation we wanted to share with you all because of its fascinating story about Black entertainment and culture. While our attempts to connect with the owner of the building have not been successful, so we cannot formally nominate this property, we wanted to share this really interesting and little-known history which helps shed light on the lives of the Black community, particularly in the 1960s and 70s. New Skateland Arena is significant under National Register Criterion A in the areas of social history and recreation. The building attests to the importance of roller skating culture in the mid-20th century Black culture and is significant in the context of the civil rights movement in Buffalo. Despite the widespread popularity of roller skating among members of Buffalo's Black community in the post-World War II era, they were not very welcomed at the original Skateland on Main Street. Opened within the context of the civil rights movement, New Skateland is perhaps Buffalo's best example of a safe space that emerged to build community bonds among Buffalo's Black East Side residents. Next slide, please. Trunis Goggins, the owner of New Skateland, excuse me. Trunis Goggins, the owner of New Skateland from 1967 to 2013, made an incredible impact on Buffalo's Black communities in the late 20th century. Born in Alabama in 1934 as one of 12 children, Goggins grew up in the Cold Spring neighborhood and attended Fosdick-Maston Park High School. He started working as a shoe shiner at the age of 9, and by the time he was a teenager, he was working in a chicken factory on Jefferson Avenue, as well as changing tires in an auto repair shop. In his early 20s, he began to drive trucks for a living, first to deliver chickens for processing and then later to deliver Coca-Cola. In the early 1960s, Goggins reputedly became affiliated with the original Skateland Arena on Main Street. Now, it's unclear what position he filled, but he did not own it. This time with Skateland may have begun his interest in opening his own roller rink. In 1967, Trunis Goggins opened New Skateland at 33 East Ferry Street. Purchasing a building originally constructed in 1921, Goggins maintained the original building and adapted it to function as a roller rink. Goggins envisioned the business as a place where community children and adults could have a safe space for good, clean fun. This vision came to fruition as many testimonies of New Skateland attendees have demonstrated. Goggins himself was quite active in the life of his attendees, getting to know the children, and over time watching them bring their own children to New Skateland as adults. He stated, "I helped raise many of the kids in my 2 skating rinks here. I treated them nice and they have never forgotten it." Next slide. Like other Black-owned roller rinks nationwide, New Skateland Arena served as a stronghold of Black culture, strengthening social ties by hosting skating events, musical performances, political rallies, and special events. Known as a place for children and adults alike, New Skateland was a fixture in Buffalo's Black East Side communities that established important connections amongst its residents and provided a much-needed recreational space for Black residents for decades. The building is also significant for its strong connection to the BUILD organization. BUILD played an important role in linking Buffalo's East Side organizations and Black residents. The organization hosted several important BUILD events and conventions at New Skateland, particularly the 1972 annual convention, where an election that challenged BUILD's leadership erupted into violence, directly linking the building to the history of BUILD and its members. This relationship to BUILD further connects the history of roller skating, Black civil rights, and racial uplift to the history of New Skateland Arena. Next slide. Well, skating occurred in the 2 rinks on the first floor. On the second floor, the Vermilion Room hosted musicians, dances, and parties. This spot was a popular adult nightclub during the 1970s and 80s with the slogan that invited patrons to go up to get down. In the first few years of New Skateland, the second floor served primarily as a banquet space, patronized primarily by Black professionals, businesses, and various club meetings. The Vermilion Room hosted many wedding receptions, private events, and political gatherings. The latter included gatherings of the Black committed social workers, Democratic campaigns, Black Education Association of the Niagara Frontier, a birthday party and fundraiser for State Assemblyman Arthur Eve, and several of these BUILD conventions. Goggins converted the second floor space into the Vermilion Room in the 1970s, embracing disco because it was the hottest new thing. The disco was held from Wednesdays through Sunday nights from 10 p.m. to 3:45 a.m., with dance contests on Wednesdays, sending the winner home with a bottle of champagne. Typically, quote, "the dance floor was jammed by persons who were doing many types of dances, from the do-your-own-thing versions of the mashed potato to the hustle and the strut. The dancing took place between a rotating mirror bulb. The space had a capacity of 350, with a dance floor, bar, carpeted walls, and lounge furnished with modern furniture that allowed guests to relax. Music, already an integral part of the roller rink downstairs, became the main draw for dancing upstairs. Sam Smith and Lamont Johnson spun records most nights, but several prominent performers graced the Vermilion Room as well. Goggins also hired live entertainment to perform at the rink and in the Vermilion Room, bringing in big acts like Gladys Knight, James Brown, Stevie Wonder, and Dionne Warwick. Rick James, a Buffalo native and friend of Goggins, played at New Skateland early in his career. His picture, taken with some patrons, hung on the wall of New Skateland for many years. Regular patrons included O.J. Simpson and other members of the Buffalo Bills, Teddy Pendergrass, and Sister Sledge. By 1977, the Vermilion Room had, quote, become one of the swinginest disco clubs in the Buffalo area. Next slide. The Vermilion Room served as the location for many Build events, including its annual conventions from at least 1971 to 1977, fundraisers for affiliated organizations and private parties. The Build annual conventions were large events with upwards of 1,000 people in attendance on some occasion. At these conventions, Build representatives gave speeches to the members, gave awards, provided updates on Build initiatives, and held elections. Food and beverage would be served, and some form of live entertainment would conclude the evening. These annual conventions were usually mentioned in local papers and served as fundraising events as well. Next slide. New Skateland Arena stands today as a testament to the persistence, dedication, and strong social ties among Buffalo's Black East Side communities during the mid to late 20th century. This roller rink and entertainment venue hosted numerous dances, performance, social events, political meetings, and Build conventions throughout its history between 1967 and 2020. Far more than simply a recreational facility, New Skateland Arena served as an essential community hub for Buffalo's Black East Side residents. Owned and operated by Trina Scoggins since 1967, New Skateland embraced and encouraged Black roller skating culture, providing a safe space for Black children and adults alike, while ensuring that the civil rights legacy of Black skating survived into a new generation as well. The significance and history of New Skateland Arena lives on in the many photos and snapshots, as well as recorded oral history, archived thanks to Damon University, located just outside of Buffalo. I hope you will all take the time to read through the context information about the New Skateland Arena, and we're sure that you'll find it as interesting as we did. So thank you for allowing me to present this.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I know we have, I don't know if they want to speak or not. There are a couple of scholars of Build on the line, and I don't know if you want to introduce. I think we have Shanley Corallo, is that correct? And Dominique Griffin. Do you want to say anything, Shanley or Dominique? Not to put you on the spot, but they have both extensively studied and written about Build.
Yes, hi, it's Shanley. Thanks so much for inviting me. This is really, really great and so exciting to see these buildings get preserved. They're such pinnacle parts of Buffalo's Black Power history, and it's really a unique history. And now in the context of everything that happened on May 14th, it's really important that we preserve these buildings that are really so central to the history. So thanks so much for your time and for the team at Historic Preservation for putting this together. It's been great.
Okay, thanks a lot, Shanley, for all your good research. Dominique? I don't want to put anybody on the spot. No? Okay.
My audio and my computer is a bit slow today.
No, we can hear you.
Okay. I don't have much to say. I have to hop off for a meeting soon, but I had to hop on for a second just to see this because being from Buffalo, like, this is just really powerful, and so I'm just so excited about the prospect of these being preserved and recognized for the cultural landmarks that they are in our communities. So thank you all for the work that you did on this.
Okay, thank you for your good research. All right. So I do want to say, Wint, through many trials and tribulations, Wint Aldrich has managed to get into this rather clunky WebEx meeting. I can't wait for the day when we can all be back in person. So we welcome Wint Aldrich, and I apologize for the technical difficulties. I guess we'll move on to next.
Can I make a comment? This is Gretchen Soren.
Please. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, I think this is a terrific amount of research and very well done. I would just like to be a little bit picky about the very beginning. When you talk about skating as a Black thing, it's not a Black thing. It is an American popular culture thing. And I think it needs to be put into that context, that in the world of segregation, African Americans were a part of American culture, but they had to identify places where they could be safe and welcome. And so they had separate places, but the narrative suggests that this was that skating was a Black thing, when I think it's it's really a part of a larger American popular culture trend of the time period.
Absolutely. Good comment. Thank you, Gretchen. We'll take that and do an edit. Mm-hmm.
Kathy,
Kathy,
oh.
this is Wint. I just want to say I would not be here without James's wonderful help
Yes.
at the other end of the line.
Yeah, I am so sorry. It's the system is not the best in the world, but thank you. We're so glad you could get on, and thank you, James Carter. Yes. Kristen, did you have something to add?
Yeah, like Gretchen, I thought the research was great, and great point, Gretchen. I just remind me here. So, is the issue that does not allow this to yet move forward as a nomination the fact that you have to identify the building owner? Is that the only thing?
Yeah.
And that's where we are right now with the building owner issue?
Yeah. Right. Yes, that is correct. We have identified the building owner. It is the widow of Tunis Roggins. We have reached out to her. We sent letters. We tried calling her. We had the community liaison to this neighborhood from city planning. We had Preservation Buffalo Niagara trying to kind of have a conversation with her. We did, our best faith efforts to, let her know, and we sent her details on what the listing would be about and what the potential benefits are, because unfortunately this property has, since COVID, it's our understanding it is closed at the moment. So correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, but there's the opportunity if she wanted to get this listed to go for the rehab commercial tax credits. So it's not, it's not dead. We're hoping at some point in the future we have the basic bones here to take this forward as a nomination, and it is eligible. So we've clearly, determined its eligibility. So that's why we cannot take this forward, but we really wanted to share this with the whole board to let you know kind of some of the work we did under this civil rights grant and how important this work is to continue.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you. So I guess, well, we can't vote on that if we have no other comments. So we move forward then to James Finelli with the Phillip Schuyler Mansion, additional documentation. And James, maybe explain what we mean by additional documentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So this is an additional documentation. This is something you can do when a nomination has already been listed, a resource has already been listed, and you want to make changes to the nomination or add additional information to it. And so a lot of nominations that are very, very old, like the Schuyler Mansion nomination, are often either bare bones or they very much have tunnel vision on the history. And so there's a lot of history that's just not discussed. And so this is a way to sort of correct the record because of oversight or even outright prejudice in the past. And so this is hopefully the first of many you will be seeing. So I'll just get started. The Phillip Schuyler Mansion, also known as Schuyler Mansion State Historic Site, is a house museum located on approximately 3 acres of land in downtown Albany. When listed on the National Register and designated a National Historic Landmark in 1967, Schuyler Mansion was listed under Criterion A in the areas of military history and politics and government for its association with General Philip Schuyler, and under Criterion C in the area of architecture as a fine example of the fully developed Georgian mansion as it appeared in the American colonies. While brief, Section 8 fully articulates the key facts related to these areas of significance. Next slide, please. However, not a single mention is made about the enslaved people who lived and worked at Schuyler Mansion, nor is even a passing reference made to the fact that Phillip Schuyler used the enslaved labor of human beings to help amass the wealth that made the construction of Schuyler Mansion possible, the labor to construct the mansion itself, and the labor to maintain the mansion as the primary residence of someone of Schuyler's political and social standing. And just some clarification on the image on the left there is just a little clip from a 1790s map of the city of Albany, and this is the Schuyler Mansion estate. The reason I show that there is that a lot of the outbuildings and the work area where a lot of the enslaved people would have spent a lot of their time are no longer extant, but the mansion itself is extant, and we believe that many of the people who were enslaved by the Schuylers would have lived or spent a lot of their time within the mansion proper. Next slide, please. A complete reevaluation of the life of Phillip Schuyler was beyond the scope of this project. The purpose of this amendment or additional documentation is to provide available documentation on those enslaved individuals who lived and worked at Schuyler Mansion, and to add ethnic heritage Black as an area of significance. This amendment was inspired by the work of Schuyler Mansion State Historic Site staff, who, in response to the national dialogue surrounding the Broadway musical Hamilton, conducted additional research into the question of Alexander Hamilton's dealings in slavery on behalf of his father-in-law, Phillip Schuyler, and members of the Schuyler family. The resulting report, As Odious and Immoral a Thing, Alexander Hamilton's Hidden History as an Enslaver, is available in PDF form on the Schuyler Mansion parks.ny.gov website. Next slide, please. This word cloud is not a comprehensive listing of the names of all the people enslaved by the Schuylers, which numbered to roughly 40 people over the life of Phillip Schuyler. But these are the people who are specifically discussed in detail in the additional documentation. Among the stories of the enslaved who lived at least part of their lives at Schuyler Mansion is that of Prince, who negotiated his own sale from a British officer to Phillip Schuyler to save himself from captivity in a prisoner of war camp during the American Revolution. Will and Britt, who were separated by enslavement to two different prominent Albany families, one to the Schuyler family, the other to the Tenbrock family, who were friends of the Schuylers, but whose own family bonds endured among their children and grandchildren after slavery ended. Claus, Diana, Scipio, and Adam, who made their own bids for freedom during the American Revolution to escape enslavement to the lines of the British Army, where freedom was offered. And Sylvia, who found work as a fortune teller to support her children as a single mother when her and their enslavement ended. Nope, that's the last slide. This additional documentation is the first of a series of amendments. Our office has been working with the Cooperstown Graduate Program with their students, and BHS staff, the Bureau of Historic Sites, has been working with SHPO on preparing documentation to add African American history to several nominations for our historic sites. Our historic sites, most of the nominations are ancient. They're 60s, early 70s, and not a single one discusses the fact that many of our historic sites are dedicated to enslavers. And so this is just the first one. We hope you will be able to learn about many more in the future. I worked closely with Cordell Reeves and Labat Nahan in the Bureau of Historic Sites, and I know Cordell. It looks like he's here on in the meeting, and I think he'd like to say a few things. Cordell.
Thank you, James, and thank you for spearheading this process. I think that this process began, or as far as the Bureau looking closely at the lack of presence among people of African descent in the stories we were telling, began as an interpretive project and as an exhibit research project years ago with the work of Travis Bowman, our former senior curator. and the staff at Kralo State Historic Site working on a dishonorable trade exhibit, which was quite successful, and it's evolved. And when James brought us this opportunity to actually incorporate the work that's been going on for years at Schuyler Mansion, I thought it was a wonderful project because this allows us an opportunity to correct the record. It allows us an opportunity to set the foundation for improved scholarship going forward as researchers use these documents. They are seeing, in black and white, the presence of people of African descent, free and enslaved, at these historic sites, being integral to building the wealth, maintaining the site, and helping the family maintain their businesses going forward as they're being treated and regarded as property. And that story has been left out of the colonial period, especially. It's been left out of most of American history, but especially the colonial period. So I think that we're doing great work here, and I hope it's the first of many to come. As James said, the Cooperstown students have done some great research themselves, and we will be able to incorporate that into future amendments of this sort. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Cordell. And questions from the board?
If there are no questions, do we have a motion?
Hi, this is Wayne. I will move this forward.
Thank you, Wayne. Is there a second?
Jennifer Lemack, I will second it.
Thank you, Jennifer. The motion is carried by unanimous consent.
We're going to move to our industrial properties next. Ms. James?
Yep. So yeah, first of our factory buildings. So this is the Boardman and Gray Piano Company. It is locally significant under Criterion A in the area of industry for its association with industrial development in Albany's North End Warehouse District for over a half century, and as the home of several of the city's important industrial concerns, most significantly the Boardman and Gray Piano Factory. Next slide, please. Initially constructed in 1853, the building was substantially damaged in a fire only 7 years later. However, the company substantially reconstructed the building, adding additional fire protection features on the same site in 1860. Next slide, please. The 1860 building, which survives with a high degree of integrity, is characterized by a rectangular form, brick walls, and a heavy timber frame, large open floor plates, and long rows of identical windows to provide light. Next slide, please. The combination of brick walls and a heavy timber frame, known as mill construction, and the internal iron firewalls added after the fire were intended to resist destruction in the event of large fires. Next slide, please. The building is important as a rare early survivor in Albany's North End Warehouse District. Boardman and Gray was succeeded by the McCammon Piano Factory, another nationally significant company, which produced pianofortes in this building for sale nationwide from 1864 until 1891. The Boardman and Gray Piano Company is a tax credit project. It has an approved Part 1. There you go. Any questions?
If there are no questions, is there a motion?
This is Erica. I will make the motion.
Thank you, Erica. And a second?
Wint, I'll second it.
Thanks, Wint. The motion then is carried by unanimous consent.
Thank you.
Are we on to Virginia Bartos and the Hickey Freeman Company building in Rochester?
Yes, we are.
Great.
The Hickey Freeman Clothing Company occupies nearly the entire block of Avenue D and North Clinton Avenue in the northeast part of Rochester. The building is a commercial tax credit and received both its Part 1 and Part 2 approvals. The sponsor of the nomination is the owner, and the nomination draft was written by Preservation Studios from Buffalo, New York. The building was constructed in 1912 with continued expansions in 1922 and 1929, giving it the current E shape. A freestanding powerhouse was added in 1946. In 1956, 2 stories were added to the 1922 factory. There's a portion there that was turned into a warehouse. And in 2005, one final expansion was a 2nd story to the warehouse and shipping addition in the 1922 section. Next slide, please. Hickey Freeman has been a manufacturer of high-end ready-to-wear men's clothing since 1899, when the company was incorporated. The construction of the new plant in 1912 represented the move from small clothing shops to large-scale industrial manufacturing. It also reflected the expanding city of Rochester and the diversification of industries that were locating at the edges of newly annexed territory. The company was part of industrial innovation, with one example being the invention and production of shipping containers with hangers. Next slide, please. Here we have an image of the original lobby area with the motto, "Keep Production Up." As stated in the nomination, Hickey Freeman attempted to keep the workforce from unionizing by instituting a labor management committee system, but was unsuccessful. The workforce joined the Amalgamated Clothing Workers of America in 1919. Next slide, please. The company building is significant under Criterion A in the area of industry for its role in making Rochester prominent in the clothing industry. It is also significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture for its 1912 building being the design of Gordon, Madden and Kelber, a major architectural firm in Rochester. Are there any questions or comments about Hickey Freeman?
If there are no questions, is there a motion, please?
This is Gretchen. I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Gretchen. And a second?
This is Wayne. I'll make the second.
Thank you, Wayne. The motion is carried by unanimous consent. Now we're moving to Daniel Boggs, the Goff Way and Brand Leaf Tobacco Warehouse.
Good morning. Connecticut broadleaf tobacco was first planted in Chemung County in the 1840s and was found to thrive in the fertile soil near the Chemung River and the area's various creeks. By the 1870s, tobacco was a major cash crop in the towns of Big Flats, Chemung, Elmira, and Southport, with nearly 60,000 pounds of it grown annually. At the peak of local tobacco production, area farmers were growing upwards of 100,000 pounds a year. Specialized tobacco curing barns were once a common feature of southern tier farms, but have become increasingly rare, as has much of the evidence of the tobacco industry. Next slide. In 1873, immigrant John Brand and 2 others began John Brand and Company, a tobacco packing and processing business on Elmira's south side that prepared tobacco for sale to cigar manufacturers. At the peak of New York's tobacco industry in 1900, there were 33 different cigar manufacturers and dozens of warehouses, processing plants, leaf importers, and cigar box makers. Next slide. The nominated building was designed by architect Joseph Considine and constructed in 1908 by Herbert Way, a former grower and employee of a tobacco packing firm. Way soon partnered with 2 other prominent local tobacco industrialists, Charles Brand, grandson of John Brand, and Gustav Goff. The Goff, Way, and Brand Leaf Tobacco Warehouse has an approved PDIL from the National Park Service and is significant under Criterion A in the area of industry and under Criterion C as an example of New York tobacco warehouse architecture. Next slide. The tobacco warehouse retains many of its original features, including fenestration, stairwells and doors, and open floor spaces with exposed timbers. Next slide. The original freight elevator is also present. Next slide. The Goffway and Brand Leaf Tobacco Warehouse is a rare and well-preserved example of a bygone but once key industry that contributed significantly to the growth and development of New York's southern tier. Thank you.
Are there any questions? If there are no questions, do we have a motion, please?
I'll move it. This is Wind.
Thank you, Wint. And do we have a second?
This is Jennifer Lemack. As a native of Elmira, I would love to.
Great, Jennifer, thank you. Then the item moves, it's carried by unanimous consent. The next item is the HM Quackenbush Factory with Aaron Cernecki.
Yes, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
This is the HM Quackenbush Factory, which is located 1 block west of the Main Street Commercial District in the village of Herkimer, Herkimer County. The factory was constructed across the street from the owner's residence and was built in phases between 1874 and 1996, with a large rear addition built in 1988 and demolished in 2017. The period of significance was drawn to encompass the full history of the factory during the historic period from 1874 to 1972. The business was initiated and the first buildings constructed by H.M. Quackenbush in 1874, and the Quackenbush family controlled the business until 2005, with the company still producing some of its founders' designs in the 1970s. Next slide, please. The H.M. Quackenbush factory is significant under Criterion A in the area of industry as one of the village of Herkimer's most important industries and for its importance as a prominent manufacturer of metal products over a long period of time. The business began in 1871 when local inventor Henry Marcus Quackenbush formally established his own manufacturing business after working at Remington Arms Company in Ilion for 10 years. Quackenbush invented and manufactured a variety of metal objects, including some of the products seen here. Up in the upper corner is an extension ladder he invented, and the Eureka air gun. Production of the company's most significant product began in the 1890s with the design and mass production of a spring-loaded handheld nutcracker, which would be made by the company for another 90 years. Along with manufacturing, the company also performed electroplating, the process of using a direct electric current to apply a protective metal coating on a product. Next slide. The H.M. Quackenbush factory is also significant under Criterion C as an excellent example of factory buildings constructed between 1874 and 1988 that expanded with additions and adapted earlier buildings. The factory retains many elements of American industrial design from the late 19th century through the late 20th century, reflecting advances in building technologies that serve the various products the company manufactured. The largest section of the factory, built in 1890, was designed in the Romanesque Revival style by a well-known Utica architect, Frederick Goud. The close proximity of the administrative offices to the factory space in this building shows Quackenbush's focus on both the business and the manufacturing. Next slide, please. The interiors retain historic integrity with intact floor plans in many locations, exposed wood and steel framing, open factory spaces, and intact interior finishes in the administrative spaces, such as elaborate woodwork and frescoed ceiling. This is a tax credit project with an approved Part 1, and the developers are working on plans for the reuse of this factory complex. Any questions?
If there are no questions, do we have a motion?
Actually, wait, sorry, this is Erica. Took me a minute to unmute. Do we know what development projects are in the works or suggested or being thought of?
Unfortunately, I am not familiar with what the developers might be working on, and the consultant doesn't know the details as either. This was a project that had an approved part one, and then they wanted to go ahead with the nomination so that they could have it listed while they're working on their development plans.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I would just add, this is Gretchen, that it's a gorgeous building, and this is an area that is so depressed in New York State that it is so important, I think, to have this building rehabbed. Whatever they decide to, if they find something good to do with it, that'll be great, because it's such a depressed area.
And this interior spaces, some of them are really quite marvelous.
Oh, yeah, they are gorgeous.
So it clearly meets the criteria as the consensus of the board for nomination. Great.
This is Gretchen, I'll make the motion.
And
Thank
I'll
you.
second, it's Erica.
Erica, great. Okay, then indeed, this motion is carried by unanimous consent. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're up to the Illinois Alcohol Company building.
Thank you. The Illinois Alcohol Company building on Niagara Street in Buffalo is significant under Criterion A in the areas of industry and social history for its association with the brewing and distilling industry in Buffalo during the first half of the 20th century, and specifically for its role in a large illegal bootlegging operation during Prohibition. Constructed by local contractors Chesley, Earl, and Heimbach in 1920, the building was originally intended to serve as the Bison City Storage Company warehouse. Next slide. During the Prohibition era, the building's design proved to be well suited for an illegal bootlegging ring led by the Illinois Alcohol Company between 1925 and 1929. Taking advantage of the privacy provided by the building's nondescript appearance, original glass block windows, concealed vehicular loading docks facing Niagara Street to the east and railroad loading dock to the west, the Illinois Alcohol Company managed to conduct an extensive bootlegging operation for several years under the guise of denaturing alcohol. Once this illegal scheme was discovered, the resulting year-long trial uncovered the involvement of several corrupt local and state government agents, railroad workers, and the company employees. In 1930, the building continued to be affiliated with the brewing industry when it was owned and occupied by the Charles Jacobowitz Company, the Niagara Filter Corporation. Jacobowitz first produced non-alcoholic beer at the building, switching to the production of brewing equipment when Prohibition regulations ended in 1933. By the time he died in 1950, Jacobowitz had become one of the nation's leading manufacturers of brewing equipment, particularly filtration systems. Next slide. Like many industrial buildings constructed on Niagara Street during the early 20th century, the building was designed to access both the railroad tracks to the west and to the roads at the east. Vehicular access points were included facing Niagara Street, where two garage doors enabled shipments to arrive and depart directly into the building. To the west, the railroad loading dock opening was included in the design of the building to enable direct access to the New York Central Railroad tracks. These access points to the east and west were integral to the original design and function of the building. Next slide. Constructed with a reinforced concrete frame, the building embraced building technologies that were typical of the era. Concrete frame construction was common amongst industrial factories and warehouses by 1920, providing plenty of open space inside without the need for interior load-bearing walls or numerous columns for additional support. Designed for use as a storage facility, it was essential that the building provide plenty of open space inside. The exterior was minimally adorned, befitting a storage facility that was intended to provide a secure location for customers to ensure that their items would be safely protected and would not receive unwanted attention from outsiders. Although the building was originally constructed in 1920, the period of significance for the building begins with the first affiliation with the history of brewing and distilling began in 1925, when the Illinois Alcohol Company leased the building and began its bootlegging operations. The period of significance ends in 1950, when the last company to be affiliated with the brewing industry left and sold the building. This period also includes all major changes to the building and indicates the years in which it was associated with the rich history of the alcohol industry in Buffalo as it grew between 1925 and 1950. So this building has an approved PDIL from NPS. This is the Illinois Alcohol Company building. Are there any questions on this?
If there are no questions, can we have a motion, please?
I'll move it. This is Wint. I think that they showed extraordinary chutzpah to call themselves an alcohol company and proceed to do exactly that. Interesting story.
Thank you for the motion, Wint. Is there a second?
And you can find online, you can find their appeal from November 1930, November 3rd, where they appealed their conviction, and the story's quite interesting. So this is Erica.
Erica.
I guess I will second it.
If I could just, hold on. Yeah, this is Kathy. If I could just interject for one moment, just a reminder, Chair, to be sure to call for any opposed or abstaining votes before we take a full vote.
Sure. Are there any opposed or abstaining votes on this one? If there are none, the motion is carried by unanimous consent. And now we go, Jennifer, you have the Aldrich and Ray Manufacturing Company building.
Okay, this is Kath LaFranc. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good, because sometimes this mic doesn't work. And
Kath, we cannot hear you. You have dropped off. So we may, if you can't get back on in a second, we'll advance to Jen Wachowski to go ahead and give the presentation. I know you had a few comments to begin with.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay,
Go ahead.
so I'm going to have to switch back and forth because I can hear with my headphones, but not too well without them, but they don't work for speaking. So just, you're going to have to bear with me a little bit. All right, so I am the MC for this proposal, or as Jennifer called me, the ringmaster. So you can imagine me in the middle of a circle with a tall hat. And most of you are familiar with this next property, but for those of you who are not on the board in 2019, or who may have forgotten the sequence of events, I'm going to start with a quick project history. Then we're going to have a short presentation from Jennifer and another presentation from the consultants. And then I'm going to sum up the staff opinion before discussion. But first, I want to introduce our guests. Michael LaFlash, who is from Heritage Consulting. He's going to be giving the presentation. And then we also have the owners, Bobby Carraro and Angelo Natali, and the owner's representative, Robert Norer. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And you will hear from Mr. Norer at the end before the discussion. And also, if the owners have changed their minds, they can also speak. So here's the sequence of events. In 2019, a proposal to nominate this building was brought before the board. After two presentations and substantial discussion, the board rejected the proposal based on the building's lack of integrity. So it was not sent to the National Park Service. The owner then appealed the board's rejection to the Park Service, which, after reviewing the nomination and the board minutes, rejected the appeal. The owners then sued NPS, and they won in the sense that NPS was directed to prepare a more thorough report on why the building did not meet the criteria. The court did not make any comment on the building's eligibility, so the court case is not our concern today. Before NPS responded to that court case, the owner withdrew the nomination and turned it over to a new consultant, Heritage Consulting, which is representing the owners today. In 2021, Heritage Consulting submitted a revised nomination to the SHPO, asking for a preliminary determination of significance under the federal tax credit program. And as you've been hearing, there are 12 projects on today's agenda that went through the same process. That nomination was substantially different from the previous one because it suggested a period of significance only from 1888 to 1893, before the fire of 1893 that destroyed the original Aldrich and Ray building. In other words, they suggested that this building had survived the fire. We sent that nomination to NPS without a recommendation, but we outlined several concerns. NPS denied the request for certification in October 2021. NPS's letter both questioned the argument that the building had survived the fire and reiterated the reason that the original nomination had been rejected by the SRB and the keeper, that the building's significance is related to the entire history of the Aldrich and Ray Company, and that the surviving fragment lacks the integrity to represent that history. And you all received a copy of the NPS letter with the draft nomination. Then following that, in December 2021, the consultant submitted a third, slightly revised draft to us, requesting a hearing by the SRB. And this is the draft that you are reviewing today. This draft still begins the period of significance with the initial construction of the building in 1888 and states that the building remains fully intact to its period of construction, even though it allows that at least some part of it was destroyed and rebuilt after the fire. The new draft also expands the period of significance to 1953, now recognizing the full history of the company as important, but without acknowledging that more than half of the complex that represents the 20th century operation of the company no longer survives. So without asking me any questions about the nomination, does anybody have any questions about that sequence before I turn it over to Jen? That's clear. Okay. All right. So turning it over to Jen, we'll hear from Jen and then from Michael.
Great. Thank you, Kath. I just want to briefly walk you through the history of Aldrich and Ray to refresh your memory or to introduce you to this for the first time. You may also see some changes to the building since we reviewed this back in March of 2019 as well. Next slide. If you'll recall, this is what the building looked like when we initially presented it to the board. So since this time, rehabilitation work has proceeded and the building has received a certificate of occupancy. Next slide. The Aldrich and Ray Company was an important manufacturer of copper and brass products in Buffalo during the late 19th and early 20th century. The company was founded in 1879 by Schuyler Aldrich. In its early years, it operated at two different locations, one on Perry Street and one on Washington Street. In 1884, Isaac A. Aldrich entered the firm, and in 1886, George A. Ray was admitted as a partner. The company moved to 1491 Niagara Street in 1888, and shortly thereafter, Aldrich and Ray built its first manufacturing facility on the site. So this is an 1889 Sanborn map showing that original four-story factory. You should also note the neighboring two-story police station, which is on the right side of the image. As we discussed with the last presentation in 2019, Sanborn maps were developed for fire insurance purposes, which relied on precise accuracy. They are a pretty reliable source of information. Less than a year later, in 1893, the factory was destroyed by fire. While most reports on the extent of the damage of the fire indicated heavy damage, it would appear that at the very least, substantial interior damage was done to the Aldrich and Ray building, as well as to the police station nearby, although some brick walls may have survived. Some reports indicate the total loss and collapse of the Aldrich and Ray plant altogether. After the fire, the company rebounded and purchased the adjacent site to the north, the location of the police station, which was seriously damaged in the same fire. Following the 1893 fire, the company did not close up or relocate. It instead rebuilt and substantially enlarged. Next slide. So this rendering shows that by 1900, Aldrich and Ray had constructed a large U-shaped building more than twice the size of its original. While the board had some discussions on how accurate this rendering may have been, new information, as we will see in a moment, shows that it was, in fact, quite accurate. This rendering shows that the factory had expanded significantly after the 1893 fire, incorporating at least a portion of the remnants of the fire station and adding a substantial rear wing. The new building was 3 stories tall and 13 bays wide. 2 wings, 11 and 19 bays deep, extended back from the main block on either side of the drive-through from Niagara Street. A 4th floor would later be added to the south wing in 1904. Next slide. The rendering is supported by the 1900 Sanborn map, which shows the same configuration and also shows the offices in the northwest quadrant, while the rest of the building was laid out for manufacturing and storage spaces. Next slide. This revised nomination presents one of the most exciting discoveries about this building, a historic photo of the front elevation dating to 1908. Here, the exact appearance and size of the building during the Alderton Ray and subsequent George A. Ray era can be understood. The Alderton Ray Company integrated some portions of the former police station, you can see the fourth floor addition that was made in 1904. Note the carriageway that provided internal access to the property, created in the gap between the remnants of the original building and the police station. Also note that the prominent cornices on the building and the painted signage, which spans the entire front of the building, unifying the facade. This photo is largely consistent with the information presented in that 1900 rendering. Slide. The Alderton Ray Company and its successor firm, the George A. Ray Manufacturing Company, occupied the U-shaped building until 1953. You can see in this 1950 Sanborn that the George A. Ray Company still occupied most, but not all of the building, and a series of Sanborns indicate that the building remained entirely intact to its construction period. The same U-shaped configuration remained as built until 1954, when a one-story gantry crane wing was added to the southeast corner by a subsequent company shown on this 1961 Sanborn. The maps show that well into the mid-20th century, all of Alderton Ray and its successor companies' functions were carried out in this U-shaped complex, and the building retained its architectural integrity as a typical late 19th century industrial factory. Next slide. In 1976, while under the ownership of the S.A. Day Company, the entire north half of the building was destroyed by fire, leaving only the south wing of the former Alderton Ray Company building and the 1954 addition added by a later company. We can see here on this 1981 Sanborn. Next slide. Here are some current photos of the building. Note that the paint has been removed from the front elevation, revealing the original brick and exposing some of the historic painted signage that we saw in the 1908 historic photo. Slide. And these are some current interior photos. The ground floor houses modern medical offices, and the upper floors are in process of being converted to apartment housing. Next slide. So in order to be eligible for the state and national registers, a resource must be significant and intact enough to convey that significance. It must retain those features, spaces, and details which define the character of the resource. Both nomination versions have described the importance of the Alderton Ray Company to the industrial history of Buffalo, but the concern here has always been a lack of integrity. The company continued operations after the 1893 fire, expanding and growing its business and its building. It did not become less important after the fire, and in fact, it became even more prominent and successful, continuing in business for some 60 years. We cannot discount the company's history after the 1893 fire. But as it is currently, the building stands in a form that only existed after the 1976 fire, a fire which occurred well after the era during which Alderton Ray and its subsequent iterations were operating within the building from 1893 to 1953. This fire caused the loss of the office, the heart of the company's operations, and substantial areas of manufacturing. The company has lost more than half, the building has lost more than half of its historic fabric from the era during which it housed Alderton Ray and has gained a non-historic addition. The building that stands presently is a fragment of the once thriving metalworks and no longer conveys that company's significance. Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to advance to the next slide? Michael?
Everyone hear me?
Okay, Michael, are you ready?
Yeah, Kath, can you hear me?
Yeah, well, can the board hear you? You're a little low for me, but.
Yes, we can hear you.
We
Okay,
can hear you. And
All
just, Michael, just let me know when you want to advance, okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for the time this morning. Happy to be in front of you all. As Jennifer and Kath both referenced, this project did apply for tax credits. Work based on the construction timeline from a few years ago did take place, as Jennifer showed in her slides. And ownership in the project team did their best to preserve the historic integrity based on the Secretary of Interior standards. As we move forward, that'll be a big part. Hopefully, if the project can move forward under that guise, that'll be a big part of the financial components there. As Jennifer and Kath also said, ownership and council are on the line. Kath, just a little update there. They do not plan to speak at this moment, but are available for questions if anybody has questions for them. And then outside of that, there was significant local political support presented to the board. Letters of support were submitted to SHPO, and hopefully you all were able to receive those. Next slide, please. So just a little recap. I'll skip through these pretty quickly because Jennifer and Kath did a great overview of just the general history here. We were nominating the building under significance under criterion A, category of industry, as a excellent example of a stamped pressed copper and brassware manufacturing facility. The rare surviving example of a copper works building in Buffalo itself, which was a huge industry there around the turn of the century. Again, period of significance, 1888 to 1953. Next slide, please. As Jennifer also noted, Aldrich and Ray and later the George A. Ray Company were very significant in that pressed copper and brassware industry. One of the largest manufacturing concerns of that in the state, who sold on a national level. Next slide, please. So just to kind of reiterate what Kath and Jennifer went through in the timeline of events, in 1888, the original building was constructed, which included half of what you see on the right-hand side of that photo. By 1892, they had constructed a 4-story rear addition that extended pretty much the full length of the building there. Then in 1893 was the fire, as they referenced, which resulted in the connecting of the building with the police station to the north. As you can see in the photo here on the right, we're calling out areas, the former police station, the 1893 connector, and the subject building as we're defining it. In 1904, after that fire, the third story, it was only a 3-story building. And then in 1904, they constructed a 4th story. And then in 1976, both sections to the north of the subject building were lost. Next slide, please. So again, you know, as we've kind of witnessed through this, as the buildings were connected, the two kind of stood as you could still identify them as their own individual. I wish I included it here in this slideshow for you, but further evidence that we included in the nomination does show that the building, subject building as we see it today, did stand proud of the police station and was identified as its own and could be identified as a standalone in its own right. It was a very slight protrusion, but you can tell today, even with the wraparound of the cornice line brick at the 3rd floor level, that there was that slight protrusion with a setback where the connector and the police station were. Also identified throughout are the stone foundation lines that wrapped into what was that interior courtyard of sorts when the company grew into a larger grouping. Next slide, please. Important to the nomination is the discussion of integrity, as Jennifer had said. National Register Bulletin 15 identifies a certain component of where rare examples of a building type can be considered significant or can retain integrity so long as they retain enough of it or are a surviving example. Directly from Bulletin 15, comparative information is particularly important to consider when evaluating the integrity of a property that is a rare surviving example of its type. The property must have the essential physical features that enable it to convey its historic character or information. In the rarity and poor condition, however, of other examples of the type may justify accepting a greater degree of alteration or fewer features, provided that enough of the property survives for it to be a significant resource. I'll touch on both of those bullet points on the next couple of slides. If you don't mind going to the next one, please. So first and foremost, the property must have the essential physical features that enable it to convey its historic character and information. Aldrich and Ray, as you can see from this interior photo, while rehab work was coming to an end, you know, it retains key elements of a purpose-built late 19th and early 20th century copperworks. You could still see the wood flooring, the exposed wood structure throughout. You see the simple brick exterior at the outside. But most importantly, if you don't mind going to the next slide, are the rooftop chimneys, which look kind of like battlements when you don't get up close to them. But what really makes this building stand out as a representative example of its type and kind of make it stand out from a generic warehouse building from that same time period are these chimneys that raise like battlements throughout, and the rendering that Jennifer showed in her slide does convey and does show the smoke coming out of some of these. And as you can see from the photo at the bottom there, the chimneys are still evident at the rooftop level. They are both on both sides of the building and extend throughout the entirety of it. Next slide, please. And again, the rarity and poor condition of other extant examples can justify significance if it survives as a rare example of that. Buffalo was one of the largest copper producing manufacturing centers in the country, especially around the time following the Erie Canal construction. The vast majority of this industry was situated downtown, right along the riverfront there in the Cobblestone District, which has been largely destroyed and lost. Aldrich and Ray, as Jennifer had noted too, was one of the most preeminent companies in the industry in all of Buffalo. They moved to a purpose-built facility in Black Rock because of that, which resulted in the construction of what our research uncovered to be the sole known extant purpose-built example of its typology in the city. Next slide, please. And so these two aerials side by side, one's from the 1930s on the left, and then the current aerial from Google on the right, shows that Cobblestone District right downtown where the Buffalo Sabres Arena is, KeyBank Center. Buffalo's copperworks industry was historically located in this area, which largely consisted of Civil War era warehouse buildings or factory buildings, again, simple brick. Our research, as I noted, does not show any purpose-built copperworks remaining. There is an Aldrich building on Illinois Street, but that building is a much later from a different company and is itself only a small fragment of a formerly large complex. Next slide, please. And so just to conclude, the Aldrich and Ray Company was significant to the local manufacturing of Buffalo's copperworks industry, and it remains as a rare surviving example of that building type. It maintains the necessary integrity defined by Bulletin 15 to convey its historic association. And on top of that, with the major loss of copperworks examples in Buffalo, this story really should be told, and the National Register of Historic Places is the primary opportunity for this story to be told. It really tells an important chapter in Buffalo's industrial history, and even with the loss of that north section, still conveys its full story through its extant features. And I thank you for your time this morning.
You're welcome, Mr. LaFash. I thank you for your presentation. I have a question for Jennifer.
I have something to say though before we get to the questions, Carol.
Oh,
I have
all right, go ahead, Kath, please.
Okay, so thank you both, Jennifer and Michael. Great presentations. And I just need to remind everybody that the sole question today is, does this building as presented in this nomination meet the criteria? So to summarize our staff, we feel that our staff position is best expressed in Roger Reed's letter. So Jen and I selected a few passages that seem especially relevant. And even though this nomination differs just slightly from the one Roger reviewed, the salient points apply. Roger agreed, as do we, that the historical significance of Aldrich and Ray is documented in the draft nomination. However, he added that the subject property comprises just one component of a factory that is well documented in historic insurance maps, city maps, and photographs, and he noted the loss of all components but the subject building. Second, he also stated that the case for significance for the original building, which is what Michael just presented, as a rare surviving example of a 19th century copper mill, is dependent on an argument the very basis of which is called into question by the extent of destruction caused by the 1893 fire. He concluded that the 1880 building was at the very least gutted. The interior is entirely wood and shows no evidence of fire damage. A narrow interpretation of the 1893 fire damage, which treats the contemporary newspaper accounts as exaggeration, must still conclude that all wood components were destroyed or damaged beyond salvation. Therefore, he says, the interior reflects the integrity of the factory post-fire. More important, nothing appears to support an argument that the design of the mill is an exceptional representation of a type, period, or method of construction. And finally, he also reiterated that the emphasis on the early factory avoids the issue of the extensive loss of the adjacent buildings that were critical in the operation of the factory during its most prosperous years after the 1893 fire. If, as the draft nomination claims, he says, the company became an industry leader, this happened in the early 20th century, not in 1888, 1893. And again, he pointed out everything that represented the operations of Aldrich and Ray during its most prosperous post-fire expansion and prosperity has been demolished except for the subject property. So these are our conclusions. First, that the original building does not retain any integrity to the pre-1893 fire. Second, even if it did, the typology defined in the nomination is not rare, but typical of all mill buildings. Brick exterior, exposed wood structure, open floor plans, and chimneys are the most common elements of industrial architecture of the late 19th century. And then finally, based on the extensive loss of components that were crucial to the operation of the company during its most prosperous years, the subject building does not appear to retain sufficient integrity for individual listing. Now, Michael, was I correct in saying no one wants to speak, not the owners or the council?
I do believe that I kind of leave it. Actually, yeah, they had mentioned that they don't have any plans to speak at this moment.
Okay, all right. So now we're open. Now, Carol, we are open for discussion. Thank you.
Kath, your concluding remarks answered the question that I had, and I might add that I've had over 40 years of experience working with the issue of the criterion in the national and state registers of historic places, and that working with that criterion has been central to the teaching I've been doing for those over 4 decades. And I've also worked on tax credit nominations of a variety of sorts. So in my opinion, the Department of the Interior has spoken, the National Park Service has indicated, and our professional staff have indicated that they do not see this building as eligible for the national and state registers. And given that, I would suggest that the board, whose main role is was noted, is to determine if a building or site indeed has the significance that is indicated by the criterion, I would suggest that the board consider making a motion to reject this nomination. And let's have some discussion on that, please.
Carol, if I may, am I allowed to interject here? I don't know the point of order on this. I'm sorry.
I believe that I asked a question of the board, so we can take your question in the proper order, sir.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to have members of the board who would like to respond to my suggestion have a discussion about that, and then we certainly will open the floor so that you have every ability to say anything additional you wish to.
Thank you very much.
Carol, this is Wayne Goodman. First of all, I think that the building, the owners, the developers here should be commended. It's an attractive building. I share everyone's concern about the intact integrity remaining. When was the development completed? When did the building go into service?
2021.
Thank you.
Other members of the board have comments?
This is Gretchen Soren. I do have some concerns that the Secretary of the Interior's standards fail to reflect, I guess, local significance, local importance in history, as opposed to simply architecture. I get that this is an architectural preservation board, but as someone who's dealt so much with so many buildings that are key within the African American community, but completely ignored by the trust because they don't have the architectural integrity. It does concern me that we're looking only at this building for its architectural significance rather than its historical significance to the community. And I see so many of these buildings that are just standing vacant, and this one is being restored. And it just would be a shame if we couldn't support this building. I get why we want to say that it's not eligible, but it pains me deeply.
I hear you. Thank you very much for your comments, Gretchen. And thank you, Wayne. Any other members of the board wish to comment before we give the floor back to Mr. LaFlash? Hearing no one, then I would like to ask Mr. LaFlash to make his comment.
Thank you again. I just wanted to speak to what the state had mentioned about the interior. Although the interior likely dates to that post-fire period in the probably around 1900 or so, the interior wood structure is still evident and still retains that turn of the century industrial appearance. That's all I wanted to say, so thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Go ahead, someone who wants to speak?
Just going to add, though, that that's not what your nomination says. Your nomination says that it retains integrity from the 1890s, and it very generously, at the most generous, it's the walls. Even though some of the newspaper accounts do say it was, nothing but a hot heap of rubbish or whatever they do say.
So given this conversation, I'm Carol Clark. I would like to move that the board makes a motion to reject this nomination. Do I have a second?
This is Wayne. I will make that second.
And who was that? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
This is Wayne Goodman.
Wayne, thank you. So we have a second. I'm making a call for anybody who is opposed or abstaining on their vote.
Gretchen Soren, I'm abstaining.
Okay, thank you, Gretchen. Others?
Carol, this is Kathy. I think for this vote, I'd like to make sure we go through each person on the board.
Okay.
In terms of entertaining your motion to reject this, that it does not meet the criteria for listing, correct? So we have an abstention from Gretchen. Go ahead.
And this is Kristen. I have to ask a question, if I might, before we do that. I have in my memory I do not think it was this one. I think it was a different nomination that did not move forward. I have it in my head that we, moving forward, not only have to vote individually, but are we supposed to be stating our reasons if we are not supporting something? Or is just a simple yes, no, abstention sufficient? Can you clarify that, Kathy?
Yes, a simple yes, no is sufficient. We do not need your explanation in terms of when we're voting.
That's consistent with my understanding as well, in my experience.
There was a question that came up at one point with another nomination some years ago. That's why I just wanted to clarify. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Carol, I'm sorry, this is Wayne Goodman. I just wanted to have a brief comment, if I may.
Sure.
Thank you. I listened to Gretchen's comment, and I certainly don't disagree. This is one of those situations where I think all of us in the preservation community, we see these buildings languishing, and we hope and try to encourage redevelopment, and certainly we applaud this one. I certainly applaud this one. I think that her comments bring up a larger issue in the preservation profession about the Secretary of the Interior standards and the future of those, and some revisions at the federal level. It's just what I'm struggling with is the integrity of the building as I see it based upon the application and those standards. So thank you.
I appreciate your clarification, Wayne, and I think your point is very well taken. And I think we have to look at the building as it stands today and make our judgment as a board. I respectfully applaud Gretchen's statement too, but she and I come out differently in terms of how we intend to vote on this. But following Kath's lead, I'm going to, in alphabetical order by last name, call on each of the members who are present and ask them how they wish to vote on this matter. Wint Aldrich.
I agree with our acting chairman in denying the nomination.
Thank you, Wint. Kristen Herron.
I say ditto to Wint because the case is about the building itself, and I support Carol. You're not your position.
Okay, so it's a no, in other words.
Yeah, I don't know which way I'm supposed to say. So am I saying no or am I saying
It's
yes to the
it's
motion?
an approval of rejecting the nomination is what you've done.
Okay, I just didn't know whether it was
Kristen,
yes to your motion or no to the nomination. So I'm supporting your position.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarity. And Erica Krieger. Erica? Perhaps she stepped away. Jennifer Lemack?
I reject the nomination.
Okay, in support of the motion that's on the floor. Thank you. And Wayne Goodman?
I support the motion to reject. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Wayne. Gretchen, once again, will you state your vote?
Yes, I abstain.
You abstain. Thank you. Brian Irwin?
Aye on the motion to reject.
Reject. Brian Irwin, thank you. Chuck Vandry?
I support the motion.
Okay, Chuck, and then are there any other members present who I had not been able to hear from? We have not heard from?
And check one more time with Erica, who is on the line. She just happened to have been muted.
Okay, Erica. Erica Krieger, how are you voting on the motion which is on the floor to reject the nomination?
I'm sorry, I'm having a bad connection.
You're having technical difficulties.
Wait.
We have 7 minutes.
Okay. Okay, well, sorry about the technical difficulties. We do have a total of 7, which carries the motion. So
that is correct, Kathy.
I'm sort of fading in and out, but I would vote with my colleagues on this.
Okay.
That would make it a total of 8.
8. Mm-hmm. And one
that's
abstention, so
definitive.
carried. Mm-hmm.
Kathy, go ahead.
Nope, we have a total of 8 people who have approved the denial of this, and with 1 abstention, so that would carry. We do have the unanimous, we have the 8 people, so that carries.
That's correct. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who participated in this discussion. I would suggest that we take a brief break at this time. I have noon on my watch. How about we reconvene at 10 minutes past noon?
Carol, could I just make one closing comment about this?
Surely, Wynn, go ahead.
This difficult case. It seems to me that in a large sense, we have to do whatever we can all the time to respect and enforce the wonderful process and system that has come into being since 1966 in identifying these resources and encouraging the preservation and reuse of those that merit it. And this is a case where the National Park Service has spoken very clearly. Our staff has spoken clearly. A great deal of thought has been put into it. And It just seems to me that in the future, everything that we do could come under fierce attack by those who don't feel as we do about the built environment. And if we can point to examples like this one, where the system worked, a huge amount of time has been devoted to it. It strengthens our case, and it will strengthen the case for those who follow us in this important work. That's all.
Thank you very much, Wint. So we are adjourning and we will reconvene at 12 mid-afternoon. Thank you. Kathy, it's Carol Clark.
Okay, Carol, one moment. We'll get everybody.
We need to go through making sure we have 7 people
Yeah.
before we proceed, I would assume.
Yeah. So let's see, if you would like to go through and see who has checked back in to make sure we have a quorum, Carol, that would be great.
That's what I'll do then. All right. Went Aldrich. Okay. Kristen Herron.
I'm here.
Thank you. Erica Krieger.
I am here.
Great. Jennifer Lemack.
I'm here.
Great. Wayne Goodman.
Here.
Great. Gretchen Soren.
Here.
Thank you. Brian Irwin.
Here.
Okay. Chuck Bandry.
Here.
And that is 8 of us without Wint. Wint, are you?
And Wint's here.
All right.
Okay.
That's 9. That's great. So we have
We're all
a quorum.
here. Excellent. Okay, so now we're going to move into the religious and civic realm, starting with James Spinelli with the First Presbyterian Church.
The First Presbyterian Church of Lansingburg, now known as the Cornerstone Community Church of Lansingburg, is an interconnected religious complex located in the city of Troy. Next slide, please. As it exists today, the church facility is a composite of multiple building campaigns undertaken between 1823 and 1958. The church meets criterion C in the area of architecture as a distinctive and intact example of a 19th century religious facility. This is highlighted by the circa 1870 remodeled facade of the church proper, designed in the Romanesque Revival style by noted Troy architect Marcus F. Cummings, which represents the reinvention of an earlier Greek Revival building. Next slide, please. The earliest portion of the building, a session house, was erected in 1823. It partially collapsed during an expansion campaign, but a portion of it was subsumed by the new construction and is thus incorporated into the present edifice. And you can see that that's in the lower left. In the 1950s, a stylistically modern addition was added to accommodate church-related activities and represents that final phase of the facility's development. So also known as the Sunday school, you see that that's in the upper right. Next slide, please. The interior of the church worship space was remodeled in 1913, and it currently portrays that period of renovation. So you see on the right is what the sanctuary space looks like today, and that's the 1913 renovation. And on the left was a photo taken maybe within a decade or so before the renovation took place, so showing an earlier iteration of the interior. Such changes are characteristic of religious buildings as they evolved in response to new fashions and the need for more and increasingly specialized space. Now, this nomination was actually drafted by Larry Moss. He's actually a former member of the SHPO office and is a congregant of the church. I think I saw Larry on the call. I don't know, Larry, you don't have to speak if you don't want to, but I didn't know if you wanted to say a few words.
Yes, I'm here. Hello.
Hi, Larry.
Hi.
Did you want to say something?
No, just that it's a combination of 5 different buildings and 4 different styles of architecture, and it shows basically it shows the development of a rural area to a busy industrial city, which was in Lansingburg, and now the bedroom community close to the political center of the state. And it's a wonderful collection of 4 different styles of design combined in a way that shows the different styles, but in a cooperative, sensitive way. That's it.
Thank you very much, Larry. And then does the board have any questions?
If we don't have any questions, I'll call for a motion, and I also want to call for any opposed or abstaining votes, as well as a second. So let's start with the motion.
I'll make the motion. It's Erica.
Thank you, Erica. And do we have a second?
This is Wint. I'll second it.
Thanks, Wint. And are there any opposed or abstaining votes? Hearing none, the motion is carried by unanimous consent. Next on the agenda is James again with the Schenectady Police Department. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, James, take it away.
The Schenectady Police Department is located in downtown Schenectady. It is a two-story brick and stone building built in 1889 as a public elementary school and was substantially remodeled for use as the city police department in 1929 to 1930. Next slide, please. The building meets criterion A in the area of government for its association with the development and expansion of urban law enforcement in the city of Schenectady in the first half of the 20th century. And you can see in the lower right a historic photo showing what the building looked like while it was still being used as a school. In 1929, the city's newly professionalized police department, with its increased bureaucratic space needs, led the city to move the police department from City Hall to the former Clinton Street School, which was remodeled to include a courtroom, judges' chambers, jury room, offices for officials, and jail cells, among other features. The most notable exterior change was the replacement of the hipped roof with a flat roof and a redesigned parapet. Next slide, please. And here are just a couple of sample interior photos. These administrative steps, as well as the remodeled building, reflected national progressive reforms, which called out police abuse and ways to address it. Police department remained at 301 Clinton Street for 43 years until cramped conditions caused the city to construct a new station, which opened in 1973. And it just as an aside, the 1973 station is an interesting brutalist structure that sits out very prominently next to the city library, and I'm sure would be eligible for listing, to be honest. This current nomination it's a tax credit project, has an approved part 1, and the work has already been completed on it. Any questions for this one?
If there are no questions, may I have a motion? Members of the board, may I have a motion?
Carol, this is Wayne. I'll make the motion.
Okay, Wayne, thank you. And is there a second?
It's Erica. I can second.
Thank you. And are there any opposed or abstaining votes? If there are none, the motion is carried by unanimous consent. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And now it's Virginia Bartos on the Fairview Cemetery.
Kathy, were you going to ask about Wayne and recusing himself?
Right, yes, I don't know if for Wayne, if he needs to recuse on any of the nominations such as this where the Landmark Society prepared the nomination, probably.
Yes, Kathy, I typically just out of even an abundance of caution, I typically recuse myself, and I gladly do so in this case.
Right, okay, thank you, yes, you will. Okay, so you are recusing. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Fairview Cemetery. If any of you are familiar with Bob and Ruth's restaurant in Naples, the Fairview Cemetery is at the end of their driveway or parking area, just west of what was the original village square. The cemetery is a settlement era burial ground that opened circa 1800. It is significant under Criterion A and Criterion Consideration D for its age and for being one of the few surviving resources that represent the first wave of early New England migration. The gates and stone fence seen here were added in 1916, paid for by Mary Clark Thompson, who was also active in establishing Woodlawn Cemetery in Canandaigua that was NR listed in 2014. Next slide, please. The marker with the flag seen on the right is for Colonel William Clark, one of Mrs. Thompson's ancestors, and the reason for her interest in the burial ground. The majority of the markers are from the early to mid-19th century. Fewer markers after, there are very, and fewer markers after 1860, reflecting the opening of Rose Ridge Cemetery in the 1850s, a newer, larger, and still active cemetery in the southwest part of Naples. The last burial in Fairview was in 1927. Some 19th century historical accounts state that part of the burial ground was first used by native Senecas, but no indication as to where this might be. There is an unmarked portion of the burial ground in the northwest end that might be this area, but part of the burial ground was also used for, this part was also used as a potter's field, so no one really knows. The lower left image looks toward the unmarked section. Next slide, please. Many of the markers contain iconography reflective of the early to mid-19th century, such as the Richard Watkins marker on the left with its intricately carved urn, weeping willow, inscription border, and corner flowers. Several obelisks indicate family plots or clusters, and these are mostly of stone. The one exception is the Wheeler white bronze marker with the date of 1888. The white bronze foot markers indicate where Wheeler and his wife are buried. Next slide, please. 3 of the corners of the burial ground have decorative metal fencing, one being for the Olney family with the weeping willow gate and clusters of grapes in a line in the center of the fencing. I should mention that it's rare to see surviving fencing, especially as one such as these in Fairview, since these were usually casualties of wartime scrap drives. The sponsor of the nomination is the Village of Naples, and it was written by staff of the Landmark Society of Western New York. Questions or comments?
Do we have a motion?
This is Wint. I'm happy to move approval.
And I'll second it. Are there any opposed or abstaining votes?
I had a question. Is this the cemetery that was discussed that supposedly had a Native American history?
Yes, supposedly, but it's not been sufficiently documented.
Is that something that should be documented? And I wondered if anyone had talked to any Native American communities to find out whether that history is part of their tradition or culture.
Probably not, and that is a very good question because a lot of the accounts are second-hand accounts, or I've even looked at a couple of bulletins from the State Museum, and it really isn't, it's very vague as to where the village might have been and if this really had been used as a Native American burial site. So at this point in time, I'm leaving it as it is, but yeah, someone really needs to go through and take a harder look at the Native American aspect of this.
Well, and maybe talk to Native American people and see if it's
absolutely, yeah.
That I mean, I think that speaks to a need to do that kind of deep research with, if we're talking about sites that address other communities. That's important.
Gretchen, this is Kathy. Nancy Herder, who is our liaison to the various nations, we can certainly have her, get in touch and see what more can be discovered here.
Thank you. I mean, it could be nothing, but it's worth a try.
Right, until you get some ground penetrating radar out in that section without any markers, who knows if there's anyone really buried there.
Do we have a motion? And we do. And we have a second. Are there any opposed or abstaining votes? And then the motion is carried by unanimous consent.
Thank you.
Yeah. And next.
Next we have the North Bergen Presbyterian Church in Genesee County. North Bergen is a small hamlet in the town of Bergen in Genesee County, about 9 miles, I'd say, west of Brockport in neighboring Monroe County. The church is significant under Criterion C and Criterion Consideration A for its architecture, specifically for being a rural Greek Revival house of worship built of locally quarried stone. Some of its Greek Revival features are the front gabled roof, cornice, wood-sided tympanum, and two-stage tower with corner pilasters. The church was originally built in 1833 and expanded in 1850, which is when the Greek Revival tower was added. Next slide, please. At some unknown date, stucco was applied to the exterior. The round arched lintels are paint on stucco. The historic image in the upper left is from a July 4th celebration in 1901, and the stucco exterior is clearly evident. The lower image shows the 1871 addition extending east. This part of the building was remodeled in 1966, when an addition was built on the south end of the church. Both the 1871 and 1966 addition were sheathed in aluminum siding. Next slide, please. The top left image shows the sanctuary looking toward the pulpit, and the image below it is the opposite view, looking at the balcony and stained glass window. The windows, as you see on the other slides, or the other images, were originally installed in 1871, but only the colored borders of the current windows are original. The south center portions of the windows were removed at an unknown date due to many of them being damaged and beyond repair. Some of the pieces were reframed, sorry, that was a Freudian slip there, reframed and placed on either side of the pulpit. Next slide, please. Here we have an interior view of the 1966 edition. The period of significance for the church is 1833 to 1966 to include the initial construction and subsequent expansions, except for a recently added food pantry, storeroom, and access ramp. The church is important for the small hamlet, serving a continuous role as a community center for meetings and local events. The sponsor of the nomination of the church and the author of the nomination is Aaron Anheuer, who also wrote the Fancher World War II Memorial. Any questions or comments on this church in North Bergen?
If there are no questions or comments, do we have a motion, please?
I'll move
This
it.
is
Wint
Erica.
again.
I'll make.
So Wint made the motion, and Erica, you're the second.
It's Erica, I'll second.
Okay, and are there any opposed or abstaining votes? If there are none, then the motion is carried by unanimous consent. Thank you. And now Jennifer Walkowski for the buildings on Niagara Street at 4th Street in Niagara Falls, please.
All right. So the buildings on Niagara Street at 4th Street is a collection of mixed-use buildings that reflect the history of what was once a dense commercial corridor on Niagara Street during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. A primary artery through the city of Niagara Falls, the buildings were originally part of a much larger commercial stretch, and the small district contains some of the only remaining examples of this important late 19th and early 20th century building typology in this area. Next slide. The district encompasses 6 buildings on Niagara Street between 3rd Street and 4th Street. One notable building is the former home of the Niagara Gazette newspaper, built in 1914. Next slide. The district is significant under Criterion A in the areas of community development and planning and commerce for its association with the transformation of urban settlement patterns and commercial activity experienced on Niagara Street in downtown Niagara Falls during the early 20th century. Due to its close proximity to the hydraulic canal, rail lines, and the primary thoroughfares of Main and Falls Street, Niagara Street was a bustling commercial corridor in downtown Niagara Falls during the first half of the 20th century. While commercial spaces lined Niagara Street for several blocks at this time, many demolitions occurred on other parts of Niagara Street and throughout Niagara Falls during the second half of the 20th century. Today, the nominated district represents a relatively rare remaining collection of buildings in the city that still reflects the typical density, architectural styles, and mixed commercial residential uses that characterized the street during the earlier period. Next slide. The district is significant under criterion C in the area of architecture as a rare collection of buildings exhibiting the typology of late 19th and early 20th century commercial and residential buildings. Embodying the urban and social development of Niagara Street as an important corridor during this time, these buildings demonstrate the typical forms of development that took place in terms of both function and design. Serving as a microcosm of the street's physical and social transformations at large, the buildings on Niagara Street at 4th Street contains examples of this type of commercial residential architecture as it evolved over time, representing the history of a neighborhood condensed within a single block. Next slide. The significant buildings constructed and occupied during this time include the Courtney Block, built in 1893, the Ellenbaum Block, built in 1895, the Lennon Block, built in 1904, the Tugby Building, built in 1909, and the Niagara Gazette Building, which was built in 1914 with additions made in 1923 and 1983. The New York SHPO is excited to see active tax credit projects for the Lennon Block, the Tugby Building, and the Niagara Gazette Building, which promises to help transform this small block of buildings and bring new life to the area. I just want to mention that during our presentations earlier today, I just received a letter of support from the Historic Preservation Commission of Niagara Falls, which lent their unanimous support to this project and some others in Niagara Falls, which I'll be presenting later today. So this is the buildings on Niagara Street at 4th Street. Are there any questions on this?
Hearing no questions, do we have a motion?
Hi, this is Wayne. I'll make the motion.
Okay, Wayne made the motion. How about a second?
This is Kristen. I can second.
Kristen has the second. Are there any opposed or abstaining votes? If there are none, then the motion is carried. Thank you. And now we go on to Central Naples Historic District, Virginia.
Yes, I have 2 historic districts to present that are in the village of Naples. These districts are the result of a 2020 cultural resource survey of the village that was funded by the Preservation League of New York State and the New York State Council on the Arts. And the first one is the Naples Central Historic District. The district is a mix of commercial and residential buildings in the heart of the village. Main Street, or State Route 21, it was extremely important, being the main connection between Naples and other communities, which continues to the present. Next slide, please. The map on the right is from 1859, and it's clear that the substantial growth concentrated in the central part of the village. Just as an aside, too, if Kathy can take her pointer and show where the Fairview Cemetery is up in the north. There it is, yes. Just to give you a kind of a bearing. The initial New England settlement started around in that area and then gradually shifted south. Okay. The highlighted area roughly corresponds to the in the 1859 map. The highlighted area roughly corresponds to the nominated district. And by last count, this district contains 182 primary and 64 secondary contributing buildings. And most of the secondary buildings are garages built contemporary to the primary building or within the period of significance, which ends in 1940. Next slide, please. The district also contains 2 individually listed buildings, the Morgan Hook and Ladder, seen on the left, listed in 1995, and the Memorial Town Hall, sort of visible, seen in the image on the right, listed in 1996. Next slide, please. The commercial core on Main Street is characterized by late 19th and early 20th century 2- and 3-story buildings that share similar profiles and setbacks from the street and very little non-historic infill. They also feature details reflecting styles popular during the period, such as decorative cornices, and some display false fronts, like the building with the green awning in the upper left image. One of the buildings in the upper right is the Naples Hotel, built in 1895, that still functions as a hotel and a restaurant, showing the village's attraction as a destination that began in the late 19th century with the introduction of the grape industry and steamboat travel on Canandaigua Lake. The hotel was built on the site where the first 1818 Lion Tavern once stood. Next slide, please. Residential areas in the nominated district developed to the east and west of Main Street and to the north along Main Street. All areas have a high concentration of late 19th and early 20th century architecture, but it's the North Main Street area that seems to have the highest concentration of Greek Revival houses, such as the building in the upper left, indicating the migration of the highest concentration of residences from the older north end to the central section of the village. Next slide, please. The north central portion of Main Street also became the prime location for churches, such as Trinity Federated Church at 119 North Main Street, seen in the upper right. The arrival of the railroad in 1892 brought another growth spurt, especially along West Avenue near the railroad station. And there's some of the images, well, the one image in the lower right is a view of one of the buildings on Main Street, or West Avenue, sorry. Next slide, please. The nominated district also contains a few rare examples of building types, such as the circa 1851 Red Mill on Wall Street and the circa 1840 Octagon House at 34 Lion Street. Next slide, please. The construction of a new high school in 1940 marks the end of the period of significance for the district. Residential areas were built out before this, but the growth of the community required a new, larger school, and the new building was the last significant civic building constructed in the nominated district. Architect Robert Graham included cut stone details of grapes on the building, indicating the importance of grape in the industry to Naples. I should apologize for not deleting comments in red on page 74. In my haste to get this nomination to you, I overlooked the comments and they will be addressed. I will make sure they'll be addressed. I think they were addressed in section 7 of the nomination, but I will double check. To date, we've received one letter of objection stating that the objector believes that a district listed would result in higher taxes due to increased property values and make it more difficult to sell houses. So far, that's the only one we've gotten. Questions or comments?
If there are no questions or comments, do we have a motion? I'm happy to move this item. Is there a second?
Name, please.
Say again?
I think we have to give our name when we're making the motion or the second.
I'm Carol Clark. I made the motion, and your name is?
Well, I guess I'll make the second. It's Erica Krieger.
Thank you. It's not in the directions I received, but that's okay. It's not a bad idea. And are there any opposed or abstaining votes? If there are none, then the motion is carried by unanimous consent. Thank you. And then we're in Naples in the south, right, Virginia?
Yeah, this is the second district that I'm presenting today. Located at the south end of the village, the Naples South Main Street Historic District is a residential area that represents the final development of the present village of Naples. The core of the district is Lower South Main Street and differs from the South Main Street commercial section to the north due to it being residential. It is physically separated from the historic commercial core in the central Naples Historic District by several non-contributing, non-historic resources on South Main Street north of Sprague Street. The former church, now the Bristol Valley Theater, also marks the edge of the Naples South Main Street Historic District. That's the church in the upper right. And it's one of two non-residential buildings in the nominated district, the other being a funeral home. Next slide, please. The period of significance for the nominated district is circa 1870 to 1935, reflecting the dates of construction of the resources and when this section of the village was completely built out. The district is being nominated under Criterion C in the area of architecture for its collection of resources that display late 19th and early 20th century architectural styles. Its integrity is reflected in the fact that only 2 out of 66 primary buildings in the district are non-contributing, and both of these postdate the period of significance. Next slide, please. Here are some streetscapes of South Main Street showing the variety of late 19th and early 20th century architecture. Next slide, please. As stated in the nomination, additional streets opened as residential development continued. These are views of James Street, located in the northwest end of the district. Next slide, please. And this is Weld Street, extending west from South Main near the south end of the district. The district is being, as I mentioned, is being nominated under Criterion C in the area of architecture. And again, the sponsor of the nomination is the Village of Naples, and the nomination was written by the Landmark Society of Western New York. So far, no letters of objection for this district. Comments or questions?
This is Wayne with the Landmark Society, so I will be recusing myself. Thank you.
Thanks, Wayne. Do we have a motion? I'll move it. Carol Clark. And a second?
This is Gretchen. I'll second it.
Thank you, Gretchen. And are there any opposed or abstaining votes? If there are none, then the motion is carried by unanimous consent.
Thank you.
Thank you. When we're back to Jennifer Wolkowski in Niagara Falls.
It's been a busy quarter for me. So the Hall Apartments is significant as a representative example of an early 20th century mixed-use medical office and residential building in the city of Niagara Falls. The apartment building is locally significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture as a representative and intact example of an early 20th century mixed-use commercial and apartment building. The 4-story yellow brick building exemplifies the building's once typical of early 20th century apartment development in the city of Niagara Falls. The property is also significant under Criterion A in the area of social history for its associations with the growth and development of Niagara Falls during the early 20th century and for its illustration of middle-class apartment dwelling at a time when the city emerged as a thriving industrial center. Next slide. Dr. Frank Hall, a prominent physician in Niagara Falls, commissioned the 3-story building in 1928 as both an office for his practice and a residence for his family. The building was laid out with 2 medical offices and a commercial space on the ground floor and apartment units on all 3 floors and in the basement. I just want to note while I'm showing this map that the boundary for this and the adjacent Sagamore apartment projects, which we'll see in a moment, is a bit unusual. In the 1970s, a small addition was added to the rear of the Hall apartment building, which interconnected into the central bay of the garage on the Sagamore property. Since we cannot draw a boundary line through a building, this bay has been included in the Hall apartment nomination since it is now interconnected. So that's why you see that little dip there in the map. Next slide. Constructed by the W.S. Johnson Building Company, the Hall Apartments features modest classical detailing on the facade, particularly the prominent entrance surround, which helped construct a formal public image for both the building and the Hall business on a prominent street corner in the city. The apartment units are generally intact with floor plans and fabric dating to the original 1920s designs. The rooms are spacious with period detailing, including arched entryways, a variety of textured plaster walls and ceilings, and even original bathroom and light fixtures. Apartment units retain the niches for their small kitchenettes. The medical offices retain a significant amount of original fabric and demonstrate changes in the physical space of practicing medicine that occurred during the early 20th century when the site of healthcare transitioned from a patient's home into a doctor's office. The period of significance begins with the initial construction of the rear garage in 1927 and ends in 1948 when the building was sold out of Hall family ownership. While healthcare providers have continued to operate in the building, the Hall family's ownership represents the building's most significant association with the significant themes. Together, the commercial spaces and apartments provide a connection to the early 20th century development in Niagara Falls, when mixed-use buildings like the Hall Apartments served a growing population with diverse needs. As I mentioned, I just received a letter of support from the Niagara Falls Historic Preservation Commission for this property. So this building has an approved PDIL from the National Park Service, and this is the Hall apartment buildings. Are there any questions?
Okay, no questions? Once we have, may I have a motion, please?
This is Gretchen. I'll make the motion.
Gretchen made the motion, and the second?
Brian Irwin with the second.
Brian Irwin made the second. Are there any opposed or abstaining votes? If there are none, then the motion is carried by unanimous consent. Thank you. And next, we're still in Niagara Falls with Jennifer.
We're moving next door. The Sagamore Apartments and Shops is significant as a group of interrelated buildings that are representative of early 20th century mixed-use residential and commercial buildings in the city of Niagara Falls. The property consists of a 3-story apartment building with ground floor retail and a standalone 8-car garage, and a 1-story 4-unit commercial building with an attached garage. Eugene C. Butler, a local florist, commissioned the 3-story apartment building in 1926 as both a shop for the family business and a personal residence, along with 2 multi-car garages and a new greenhouse. In 1927, the 1-story multi-unit commercial building was constructed on the site. Next slide. The property is locally significant under Criterion A in social history for its association with the growth and development trends in Niagara Falls during the early 20th century, when the city emerged as an industrial center. The Butler family operated a nursery and floristry business on the site from at least 1886, when the immediate area was still sparsely settled. As the neighborhood around Main and 3rd Streets developed into a vibrant commercial and residential area, and apartment living gained an increased cultural acceptance, Eugene C. Butler capitalized on the economic success of his father's florist business by constructing the multi-use apartment building and the commercial block. The transition from the earlier, more agricultural use of the property into a valuable piece of realty by the same family reflected the development trends occurring throughout Niagara Falls in the early 20th century. Next slide. The buildings are also significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture as notable local examples of Tudor Revival style in both commercial and residential contexts. Designed by architects Kirkpatrick and Cannon, the 1-story Sagamore is a mixed-use building once typical of early 20th century apartment development in Niagara Falls. The sophisticated Tudor Revival facade, which wraps around the elevations on both Main and 3rd Streets, helped to create a formal public image for both the building and the Butler family business on a prominent street corner in the city. While targeting a more modest income level than luxury apartments, the Sagamore and its revivalist style still displays the timeless respectability that investors created to appeal to potential tenants. The Sagamore commercial block to the south was constructed in a matching style to clearly associate the two buildings. Slide. Period of significance begins with the construction of the apartment building and garages in 1926 and ends in 1956 when Eugene C. Butler died, bringing the family-owned business and the city's oldest florist to a close 80 years after its founding by his father. While florists continued to lease the main storefront of the building until a fire destroyed the rear greenhouses in 1970, the era during which the Butler family owned and operated the property encapsulates the architectural and social significance of the building. So again, we have a letter of support from the Niagara Falls Historic Preservation Commission on this one as well. So this building also has an approved PDIL from the National Park Service. And so this is the Sagamore Apartment and Shops. Are there any questions?
If there are no questions, do we have a motion?
This is Wayne. I'll move it forward.
Wayne, I want to thank you. And is there a second?
This is
This
Kristen.
Wayne. I'll second it.
I think Kristen was ahead. Kristen Herron gets the second. Are there any opposed or abstaining votes? If there are none, the motion is carried by unanimous consent. Thank you. And now it's
you like me to start?
Yes, yes, please.
The Mark House is a rural dwelling in the town of Colony and meets criterion A in the area of settlement for its association with the post-Revolutionary War settlement of the North Colony area. It is also eligible under criterion C in the area of architecture as a rare surviving example of a rural house type that was once the most common house form in the town. Next slide, please. Believed to have been initially constructed circa 1791, when Isaac Mark was granted a tenant lease by patroon Stephen Van Rensselaer III, the house was either significantly altered or rebuilt circa 1840. Next slide, please. The nearly 700-acre farm, which was a collection of smaller tenant farms that the family then leased out to other subtenants, remained under the leasehold until the system was abolished in the mid-19th century, and substantially remained and subsequently remained in the Mark family until 1881. One note I will make is you'll see in the upper left is a map of the Van Rensselaer Manor, and then the lower right is a mid-19th century map. Note it says Marks. That's an error on the part of the map maker. It's Mark. The house in question, it says Widow Marks. When Isaac died, his wife lived in the house, and then her son lived in a more substantial house nearby, which you see as marked as G Marks on the map there. Next slide, please. Although some parts of the house are inaccessible for inspection, all available evidence supports the supposition that while the actual construction may be more recent, the design itself, including its framing, form, plan, and proportions, embodies features characteristic of Northern European building traditions as they developed in the New World in the late 18th century. Next slide, please. The Mark House is typical of the dwellings constructed on tenant farms throughout the Van Rensselaer Manor and represented an adaptation of the Dutch gable end city house to a rural setting where, without the constraints of narrow city lots, builders of such residences spread them out and moved their entrances to the side elevations while retaining the typical pattern of bent framing and gables. And this nomination has quite a few letters of support, a letter of support of the daughter of the owner, a letter of support from the town historian, letter of support from the Town Historical Society, and also I just received a letter of support from the County Historical Society as well. And the nomination was largely drafted through the efforts of the Town Historical Society. And I believe Michael Redlick is present. I don't know if he would like to say a few words in support of this nomination. Michael?
Yes, as president, our organization believes the Mark House is very important to the history of the town of Colony, and we obviously endorse the nomination. The house needs to be preserved as a unique part of our town's history. I just want to thank James for his support and encouragement in this process as we went through it. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Does the board have any questions about this nomination?
Okay, if we're don't have any questions, do we have a motion, please?
This is Wint. I'm happy to move it.
Thank you, Wint. And a second?
This is Jennifer Lemack. Me too.
Thank you, Jennifer. Any opposed or abstaining votes? If there are none, the motion is carried by unanimous consent. Now we move on, James, again, but in Greene County.
Yep, we're kind of bouncing all over the place here. This is the Captain Joseph Allen House. It is a federal-style dwelling located in the town of Catskill. The 5-bay brick building was constructed in 1814 and stands out for its high degree of architectural integrity. It is significant under criterion C in the area of architecture as a distinctive, intact example of the federal style in Greene County. Next slide, please. The exterior exhibits several character-defining features of the style, including an overall symmetrical and rectangular form, Flemish bond brick, a center entrance with its elaborate semi-elliptical fan light and side lights, which you saw on the previous slide, narrow windows, and light, delicate ornamentation. Features added in the later decades of the 19th century exhibit hallmarks of Victorian architecture. The full-width front porch and the second-story projection centered on the facade feature these architectural elements. The projection may have been adapted from an original window or decorative molding from the federal period. Next slide, please. And here are some samples of the interior. The interior retains strong integrity to the federal style with a center hall plan and interior finishes such as window moldings and marble mantles exemplifying the style. And this nomination is a tax credit project that has an approved Part 1. Any questions about this one?
If there are no questions, do we have a motion?
This is Gretchen. I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Gretchen. Is there a second? I'll second it. Carol Clark. Are there any opposed or abstaining votes? If there are none, the motion is carried by unanimous consent. Thank you.
Chair, this is Clinton Brown. May I make a comment, please?
Yes, sir.
Oh, hi, Clint. I didn't realize you were on the call. Otherwise, I would have said something. I apologize.
Not to worry, James. Actually, Greg, I'm here on behalf of Michael Ellis, who is a young entrepreneur from New York who ventured north to buy and restore this building to make it available to others as short-term rental. And he could not be here. And Greg Pinto of Clinton Brown Company Architecture did the work of this nomination. And unfortunately, he can't be here. I'm a poor substitute, but Greg's message would be to thank James Carter. I think we started with you, James Finelli, Kath LaFranc. I think Bill Krettinger had a hand in this because the story of Captain Joseph Allen goes back to the Revolutionary War, his either actually being a privateer or enhancing his reputation by reportedly being a privateer. Still has to be sorted out. But a final comment of gratitude to the Vetter Research Library, which has many of his papers. In the historic preservation business, how many times do you get to hold the receipt book of the person who built the house you're standing in that's still substantially what he commissioned to have built out of the local materials from the local tradespeople that are recorded in the book? And Vetter has that book, and this was an extraordinary story. It took a village to make it happen, and we're so grateful to the State Historic Preservation Office staff who really were as excited about this as we were. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. All right then, James, it's the Gooding Farm in Rensselaer County. Please proceed.
Thank you. And I'm just going to say I love this property. It's a very cool one. So the Gooding Farm is located in the town of Hoosick in the hamlet of Eagle Bridge. Is significant under criterion A and criteria C in the areas of agriculture and architecture as an exceptional and highly intact collection of residential and farm buildings in a small but intact agricultural landscape that illustrates one family's use of the land for nearly a century. The nominated property consists of approximately 42 acres, once owned by David Gooding, a descendant of Hendrik Van Ness, one of the original grantees of the Hoosick patent in 1688. Next slide, please. The Van Ness family owned this land from 1688 through 1819, before its full development by the Gooding family. Built circa 1840 for the Gooding family, the brick house, consisting of a main block and kitchen wing, is representative of the Greek Revival style, though in its two-story center entrance gable end form, it recalls the previous federal period. Next slide, please. Original finish treatments are largely unaltered from the 1840s building campaign, with modest exceptions. Next slide, please. And I want to note that the farm has a total of 12 outbuildings, reflecting its agricultural use from the mid-19th century up to about in 1900. And these are just a selection of those buildings. In addition to the brick dwelling, the nominated property also includes an English barn, upper left, a dairy barn, upper right, a milk house, a corn crib, lower left, a chicken coop, which I believe that's the one on the lower right, either that or it's the hog shed, all of which embody building traditions typical for this region in the mid to late 19th century, and all of which survive with a high degree of integrity. In fact, such high degree of integrity there's an attached milk house to the main house, and that actually still has like some of the equipment in it for cooling the milk. So it's very, very cool. The house, barns, outbuildings, and associated land serve as complements to one another and preserve the core of a working farmstead that was first put under cultivation in the early 19th century. And the home is owned by Brett and Crystal Walters, who I believe I saw them them listed here. Brett or Crystal, would either one of you like to say a few things?
Yes, I would. Yeah, I'd like to first of all thank you, James, for all your help in putting this nomination together with us, and also to the Hoosick Historical Society, who provided us with a lot of documentation to help make this possible. And for us, myself and Crystal, it's an honor for us to own this property and maintain its heritage.
Well, thank you very much, Brett. We appreciate your comment. Do we have any questions? How about a motion?
I'm happy to move it.
Thank you,
Terrific
Wint.
property.
And a second?
It's Erica. I will second. Oh.
I heard Erica first for the second. And are there any opposed or abstaining votes? If there are none, the motion is carried by unanimous consent.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And now we are moving on to Jennifer Betzworth in Columbia County.
Good afternoon, everyone. So this is the Sweet Homestead, which is locally significant under Criterion A in the area of agriculture for its association with nearly a century of varied agricultural use, illustrating changing trends in Columbia County. Next. The farm was established by Philo Sweet and was occupied by 4 generations of the Sweet Sherman family. It includes the house, outbuildings, some open land, and a barn complex. Next. The property is additionally locally significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture as a good example of a rural Hudson Valley agricultural homestead. The circa 1845 Greek Revival Sweet farmhouse is at its core. Largely intact, it exhibits key features of the style. Next. And the side entrance, which also has that Greek Revival surround with the pilasters, is somewhat unusual and interesting on this building. The house reflects the original building campaign, as well as later ones in circa 1870, the pinnacle of the farm's success, when it was expanded to house additional family and staff. Next, we have some images of the interior. So it still remains quite intact to its historic use. Next. Philo Sweet sold a small piece of land to Milton Trafford, the likely builder of the Sweet homestead, for a home. Trafford's heirs later sold the property back to Sweet's heirs, and it became a tenant house on the property. So while it's seen some change, it has this important connection and it still maintains its historic form. Next. The Sweet family's agricultural enterprise initially focused on diversified cash crops in addition to subsistence for the household. After Frank Sherman took over management of the farm in the 1890s, Production was specialized to focus on dairy. Sherman played an active role in the community and was a founding member and first master of the Copac Grange. The property remained in agricultural use until 1923. Next. And the barn complex, which you could see in that last photo and again here, is located directly across the street from the farmhouse and remains largely intact to its original appearance. Next. So we have a letter of support on this from the Copac Town Supervisor, and the draft was written by Catherine, the owner, and she is in attendance. Catherine, would you like to say a few words?
I would. Thank you very much, Jennifer. And thank you very much for your support over these past year and a half. I would like to begin by acknowledging historian Ruth Pawanka, who was my early collaborator on this project and who brought deep insight into the history and significance of the Sweet Homestead. Although the site is neglected, I purchased it in 2020 for sole purposes of preserving the Greek Revival farmhouse. And during my time researching the property, in addition to understanding its historic context and architectural significance, what I discovered is that the solar siting of vernacular buildings, the significance of historic social yards and farm life, and that the stories of the 4 generations of the Sweet Sherman families documented the rise and decline of the family farm in very personal terms. I'm hoping to preserve and bring new life to the Sweet Homestead and to make the property available for ongoing use and access by the community. Thank you, Jennifer, again, for all your support for this project, and thank you to the board.
Thank you, Catherine. Are
Great.
there any questions from the board on this one?
If we don't have questions, do we have a motion?
This is Kristen.
I'd be happy to.
I think
move.
Kristen was first on that one.
I'm sorry I
okay.
beat you, Wint.
Kristen Herron has the motion and Wint Aldrich is the second. Will there be any opposed or abstaining votes on this item?
Carol, let me just say that I make my second in grateful memory of Ruth Pawanka, who was a marvelous resource and friend to many of us.
Thank you, Wint. That's great. If there are none, then the motion is carried by unanimous consent. And next we have Daniel Boggs at the Stowell House in Elmira.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. The Stowell House at 319 William Street was constructed circa 1850 for prominent local builder Abel Stowell, and is significant under Criterion C as a distinctive and highly intact example of transitional Greek Revival to Italianate style residential architecture. The building has an approved PDIL from the National Park Service. Next slide, please. The hall features a gracefully winding staircase with a large fluted newel post. Hardwood flooring is present in the majority of the wood frame building. Next slide. Laid out in a side passage plan, the house is distinguished not only by the prominent mix of Greek and Italianate motifs on the exterior, but also its intact historic floor plan. Next slide. Also featured throughout the residence are early 20th century colonial revival style embellishments, such as moldings and trim, and colonial revival, neo-federal, and Georgian revival fireplace mantels. Next slide. Remarkably, the Stowell House retains most of its original windows, lintels, and sills. Next slide. The Stowell House embodies the overall classical form and decoration of the Greek Revival style, blended with perfectly proportioned Italianate decorative elements, and retains many interior historic details and finishes, complemented by later features that illustrate contributing changes over time. Thank you.
Are there any questions on this item? Do we have a motion?
This is Jennifer Lemack.
Okay, Jennifer Lemack has made the motion. How about a second? I'll second the item. Carol Clark. And are there any opposed or abstaining votes? If there are none, the motion is carried by unanimous consent. Thank you.
Thanks.
Erin, Delaware County.
Yes. Hello again.
Hi.
It seems fitting that we finish the presentations with a summer retreat at the June meeting, just as the summer is beginning. This is the Max and Joanna Fleischman House, now known as Spillian. It's located just outside the village of Fleischmans in Delaware County. The property occupies a 32-acre parcel of what was originally the 160-acre Fleischman family compound, known informally as Fleischman Park. This nomination continues the recognition of the importance of the Fleischman family to the village and tells the story of the only surviving summer cottage on the property. The period of significance begins in 1886 with the construction of the Max and Joanna Fleischman House and ends in 1972 when the house discontinued being used excuse me, as a summer residence. Next slide, please. Forgive me on this slide because yesterday when I was telling Virginia where exactly the Max and Joanna Fleischman house was, I was looking at a very small slide and I got the wrong house. So the circled house is not the Max and Joanna Fleischman house. The Max and Joanna Fleischman house is about one house over on the right, so center right. Yes, that one right where the cursor is, that is the Max and Joanna Fleischman house. It can be a little complicated to figure out which house was which. There are about 6 of them on the property. The Max and Joanna Fleischman house is significant under criterion A for its association with recreation in the Catskills over many decades and for its association with the Fleischman family, which had an enormous impact on recreational development in the area. The Fleischman family compound served as a gathering place for late 19th century intellectual and cultural luminaries from New York City and the impetus for other leading figures in the arts, business, and politics to build summer retreats in the area. When the Fleischmans first came to this village, originally known as Griffin's Corners, it was during a time of renewed anti-Semitism, and they sought a welcoming community where they could build their own summer retreat. The elegant compound the Fleischman siblings built here included 6 family-owned houses on the hillside overlooking the village, along with support buildings, recreation facilities, gardens, and carriage roads. In the very upper right-hand corner, there's 2 buildings that are kind of off by themselves, and that's the stables and gymnasium. So even their recreation buildings were quite extravagant. Next slide, please. In 1915, the Fleischman family subdivided the property and began summering in other locations. Some of the houses were turned into resorts or summer camps. By the 1930s and 40s, many of the houses were being torn down and sold in pieces because maintenance and the economy were making it hard to keep up the large houses. In 1951, the Max and Joanna Fleischman house was purchased by the Lederer family, who had fled Europe during World War II, and for 18 years the property was known as the Lederer Park Hotel and was the center for ongoing summer gatherings of internationally important Jewish religious leaders and scholars who were exploring the place of Jewish people after the Holocaust. The historic photo on the right shows a couple of gentlemen out in front of the house. Those gentlemen are Rabbi Aaron Kotler and Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. They were both important figures, religious leaders and scholars. Next slide, please. The house is also significant under Criterion C as a distinctive and exceptionally intact example of a large-scale summer cottage in the stick and shingle architectural styles. Next slide. Designed by architect Theodore G. Stein, who was a nephew-in-law of Max and Joanna Fleischman, the house is an example of a summer cottage based on those being built in other late 19th century summer resort towns such as Newport, Rhode Island. The style and use of wood on the exterior and interior reflect the natural environment of the Catskill Mountains. Next slide. The house is especially distinguished by a lavish overlay of interior decorative paintings which cover most of the main floor and parts of the second. These were added by an unknown artist or artists. The oil paintings are primarily floral and were painted over beadboard to frame art, mirrors, and light fixtures. Next slide. The nomination includes the surviving buildings on the property, Max and Joanna Fleischman's house, an ice house that you see here on the left. That's right behind the main house. A gazebo, a spring house, a couple of tennis courts, and a mikveh, that is the red building in the right, which is a spring-fed ritual bathhouse that was built for the rabbis when the house was being used as a summer retreat in the 1950s and 60s. Next slide. I have 6 letters of support from local organizations and the village. Everybody is very excited to see this house be nominated. And I also have the sponsor of the nomination, Lee Melander, is in the meeting. Lee, if you'd like to say a few words.
Thank you, Erin. I'd love to. First of all, thank you so much to you and to Kath LaFranc for some pretty extraordinary work putting this nomination together. I really appreciate it. I'm surprisingly emotional hearing this. We have owned this property for about 10 years and brought it back from having not been lived in for 20 years. And what I've discovered in this process of exploring its history is not only the energies and the ideas and the people that the Fleischmans brought to the community, but also, as Erin was just speaking about, this later 20th century piece of history with this community that was coming out of the Holocaust and trying to reinvent themselves. And I was struck, as I've been listening with great interest to the other nominations today, by how relevant this still is. Right now, Fleischman's as a village is in a moment of real tension between the Hasidic and Orthodox communities who come for the summer and folks who are here year round. And it's one of our hopes about this nomination is that it will help to land everyone in contextualizing and how that community came to, how the Hasidic and Orthodox communities came to Fleischman's, and how the built history matters in this community, and how perhaps we can find some ways to connect the dots. So again, thank you. I appreciate your consideration, and Erin and Cass, thank you so much for all of your hard work.
Thank you, Lee.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Melander. Are there any questions? Okay, do we have a motion?
This is
Brian
Gretchen.
Irwin with the motion.
Gretchen Soren made the motion, and the second was?
Brian Irwin seconds.
Okay, Brian Irwin second. And are there any of us planning to be opposed or abstaining as we vote?
Hi, this is Erica. I just pardon my delay in responding. It's
Sure.
interesting. I just wanted to make a comment how this is certainly not the first Fleischman's project we have had. We had one actually, I believe, about a year ago. So clearly a significant family and influencer in the state.
And
Absolutely, yeah.
this is Brian Irwin with a probably overly technical comment to make, but this place just looks super cool. So that's just for the record.
It sounds good to me, Brian.
And how rare to have a mikveh. I mean, the buildings are so important, also because they're so rare. To have a historic mikveh is pretty amazing.
I don't know what a mikveh is. I'm gonna have to look that up. So I'm learning something as well with this. But yeah, just what a cool property. What a cool building.
And I will just make a further comment because, as Erica said, it was June 2020 when my very first nomination was the Mountain Athletic Grounds, Mountain Athletic Club grounds, which was the ballpark that the Fleischmans helped create in the village. And yes, they were really instrumental in bringing so much summer, you know, some of the other summer resorts that were created in the village and the people that were coming to the village in the summers, they had a lot to do with that. So it is wonderful to see this continuing even from that project a couple of years ago.
And the other one we did was the Fleischman House in Peekskill, New York, which
That's
is where
right.
their facility was. So. And I will say, with technical language as well, cool is really the way to describe that. You'd almost think it was done in the 60s.
But I think so much Jewish culture in the Catskills has been lost. You know, all the hotels, all the large hotels are gone. And I think this is a really important historical site as well as architectural site.
I would agree.
Yeah.
That's a very good observation.
Yes, and particularly the connection to the fact that the community was not welcome in places like Saratoga. It's how Sharon Springs, for instance, also became popular, and this area here.
All very interesting.
And not welcome in the Adirondacks either.
All right.
This is Went. There's one other thing that we could all be grateful to the later member of the Fleischman family, later generation, Raoul Fleischman, who I think spent his youthful years in the summer in Fleischman's, New York, was for most of its history the owner of the New Yorker magazine, and he kept it absolutely intact and free of any ownership involvement in its editorial quality. A remarkable person whose philanthropy took a different form. This was a good meeting, Carol.
Oh,
Yeah,
well, thank you, Ed.
one last comment, and this is in a way kind of creepy. All this talk about Fleischmann's, and an ad just popped up on my computer screen for Fleischmann's yeast. So clearly somebody is listening to us.
That's good. Well, we're not quite done yet, folks. There's just a little bit more, but I think that we need to vote on this item, don't we? Or did we actually vote?
Yeah, I think we already had a motion and a second. I think
That's where we
interrupted
left
the
it. Yeah,
flow.
I need help at the end of the meeting, I'm afraid. Okay, so if there is anyone planning to oppose or abstain on this item? If there are none, then the motion is carried by unanimous consent. Okay, and there's a couple of other things that I need to mention. Is there any new business that we want to bring up? If there is, we can communicate with the staff in due course. How's that? And then the next meeting may be in person. We don't know for sure, but it is as it's on our calendars. I'm sure September the 8th. Perhaps it'll be in People's Island. We'll see, or in Albany. And I thank everyone for their participation, and the staff especially for all of their hard work. And I'm wondering if we can have motion for adjourning this meeting.
This is Gretchen. I'll make that motion.
Thanks, Gretchen, and I'll second it. How's that? So by the motion that has been made and seconded, the meeting is adjourned at 1:27 p.m. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, Carol, for stepping in and doing a wonderful job today. Really appreciate you stepping in the last minute. So thanks again, everyone.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you, everyone.